All right, hello everyone, and welcome to season 6 of the VML here. This is week 6, and I am joined here by Arya. Arya, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing really well. Happy to be joining you. Reminded that the VML is sponsored by Wizards of the Coast and brought to you in partnership with the NRG series. So check out the awesome paper tournament series, of which I believe there's a large tournament happening this very weekend.
Yes, absolutely. And very much shout outs to that tournament happening this weekend as well. So I want to address something. We have to talk about this, right? So, new format just drops this week. Alchemy. I want to hear your thoughts as well as everybody else's thoughts here in chat before we get started with our matches for this week.
I'm really excited to see what it turns out like. Just a new format with a new format's just always really exciting. I feel like with standard and historic, we kind of get into a rut a little bit where, it's the same decks and they get iterated on, but it's the same general archetypes. But Alchemy is basically a brand new format. So I'm really excited to see what'll end up being good and what won't.
Absolutely. And I love the word that you used there, iteration. That is your inner Izzet player coming through right now, especially in the current standard right now. I absolutely love the mood. I love the energy here. I don't want to wait for the matches coming up this week. So let's roll right into our first match. Let's see what we got. So here we have the one and only Emmaskyeward, who's been doing tremendously well this season. I believe up till this point, undefeated. I would have to double check, but I'm pretty sure up till this point, undefeated. And the deck we're looking at here, mono green Stompy, little biased towards this color. Big fan of anything that goes big, anything that stomps. Some cards to watch out for here. We have Ranger Class, Essex Chariot, Run in 7, and I like how Outland Liberator is thrown into the mix here. Again, this is a hidden threat that most folks aren't aware of until it's staring at them in the face and it takes out an artifact or enchantment. What do you think about this deck, Arya?
I think Mono Green is surprisingly well positioned for a comeback right now. I think since Crimson Vow came out, the deck had maybe suffered a little with Mono White and Izzet control decks both getting a lot more tools, but Mono Green just getting the one new one drop. But because of that, people have been respecting the deck a lot less with their preparation, their sideboard. So the deck's actually really well positioned right now just because people don't seem that prepared for it.
Very interesting. And one last thing I want to bring up here. I love these questions here. We have, how would you describe your approach to Magic? Intuitive. I tend to play by instinct a lot. That is the sign of an aggro player. I seem to see that across the board. If you play aggro, if you want little creatures or big stompy creatures, we play by intuition. Absolutely loving it. Now let's take a look at Emma's opponent. And that's going to be Rebecca Black, another very formidable opponent. So, folks, this week, these are going to be matches that are going to be big determiners going into our wild card. So please keep that in mind. The stakes are very, very high from here on in VML Season 6. And the deck we're looking at here is Izzet Control, again, talking about iterations of sorts here. This deck has it all. We have both versions of iteration, the Coffee Spell and the draw spell here. Lear is one that's been seeing some use lately. And of course, the not alchemy, important to note, Alrune's Epiphany here. Arya, I already kind of have a feeling of what you're going to say about this deck, but how is this deck? Is it positioned right now currently in Standard?
Well, I mean, Izzet is definitely the deck to beat. It was by a huge margin the most played deck at the championships last weekend and performed really, really well as well. That said, one of the decks it can be a little softer if you're not adequately prepared for it is Mono Green. And while there are those 3 copies of Burning Hands in Rebecca's sideboard, there's no Cyclone Summoners, which is definitely the most impactful card you could have against Mono Green. And not having that trump card makes this matchup maybe a little more challenging than you'd like it to be on the Izzet side.
Indeed, yeah. So I have seen a lot of different iterations of sideboard here. I'm not sorry about this pun, y'all. You're going to hear that one all night with Izzet. Without the Cyclone Summoner, absolutely, you're losing that layer of protection there. So without further ado, tale as old as time, let's go to Izzet versus Mono Green. Good luck, folks, and have fun here. I'm very excited for this match. All right, so as we take a look at the opener here, Snowlands, Haven, pretty standard fare. You love to see it. The only fear is you can't play the Old Growth Troll if you drop, but we don't have it. So no presence in hand, no worries here.
Yeah, this is a hand I think I'd be really happy to see on the monogreen side. Back leader is very easily a best early threat, the 2-drop slot. Well, maybe having a 1-drop would have been nice, even without a 1-drop. Back leader and then Essica's Chariot as your most resilient threat are the 2 cards I'd most want to see against Izzet.
Absolutely. So we're getting here into the turns here. You need a little bit of setup. Izzet has setup. Mono green has setup. We have that sticky situation. Werewolf Pack Leader just sitting there in the meta. It looks and it seems like a counter spell. So we're going to see momentarily. There is a little bit of a debate here. There it is. That is that Jawari disruption. Very powerful in Izzet.
Yeah. And what that pause and that time to play the disruption says to me in Emma's spot is it's fairly likely Rebecca doesn't have too many more lands. I think if there'd been plenty of lands, a disruption would have just been fired off. But perhaps with not too many lands, there might have been some hesitation there rather than playing it instantly, as we saw.
Yeah, and we see this demonstrated as we do have the hazard in the back. Pyre again, the removal is real here, and the more turns you give Izzet, the more spooky it gets if you are the aggro to mid player here.
Yeah, in Rebecca's spot, this is, I think, exactly the sort of start she'd want. A start where you're not falling too far behind to early damage so that you can maybe take a turn or two off in the mid game to play things like Unexpected Windfall and set up for the late game and then take over with Alrund's Epiphany and Galvanic Iteration before the monogreen player can apply too much pressure.
And Arya, you were talking about the addition of Crimson Vow cards earlier. We just saw that. A Braid for Essica's Chariot. If you're the Izzet player, you do love to see it. You are staving off some of that aggro aspect here. And it looks like another Chariot is about to be played. Oh, wait, maybe not. What are you doing, Emma? We have a swing here by our kitties left over by the cat bus.
Yeah, and it's pretty important to note here that Rebecca on blue-red missed her 5th land drop. She was on the play this game, but didn't end up having another land, and that could end up being really, really important because this deck is one that wants 8-9 mana to be able to cast Elrond's Epiphanies and Galvanic Iterations in the same turn. So being stuck on 4 lands is a pretty big deal.
All right, still looks like 4 lands on the side of Rebecca Black here. And there is a lot of thought that goes into Izzet here, so we're deep in the tank here, maybe considering whether or not to hold up maybe a Divide by 0. Remember, we do not have the other hand here, so we're only able to guess what's going on here. So as said before, though, that 5th land is still not there.
Yeah, the other thing that's really important here is that so far, there's just been a bunch of 1-for-1s on Rebecca's side, but no card advantage. So we saw a single removal spell trading, a counter spell trading for a pack leader, a removal spell trading for the Mammoth, a removal spell trading for the Chariot. But that removal spell on the Chariot wasn't trading 1-for-1 because the Abrade on the Chariot still left those 2/2 cats left behind. And that does leave Rebecca a little behind on cards because she did go slightly down on that exchange.
Indeed. So, Emma, a loaded board right now. 2 Faceless Havens, as if one wasn't formidable enough. There's 2 of them. Emma choosing to also, just like in that last battle phase where the Chariot wasn't played initially, keeping up that Inscription of Abundance. And while all 3 iterations of the card cannot be played, even having that single one there is pretty valuable here. Curious to see what's going to happen from Rebecca. Will that 5th land be hit?
Yeah, it's certainly an awkward spot because she needs to both hit her 5th land and answer all the threats from Emma, and doing both of those at the same time is really difficult because the cards that you'd want to spend to try and hit land drops generally don't incentivize interacting with the board.
Emma showing us, speaking of interaction, you don't see a ton of it in mono green. Emma showing us how valuable the little bit of interaction mono green can have there. Saves the instruction to save the Werewolf Pack Leader, And what's that's going to do is if Rebecca can't take down the pack leader, that is going to enable the draw, either via Haven or via another possible series of creatures.
Yeah, and just forcing Rebecca to spend a Syndiclasm there to make sure the back leader dies rather than saving it to actually be able to kill his 2/2s was pretty important work from that inscription. And it's allowing Emma to threaten lethal perhaps a few different ways next turn and leaves Rebecca in a tough spot.
Yeah, Emma right down the middle there, reducing Rebecca down to 6 life here. And again, it's been said again and again, we are still looking for that 5th land. So Rebecca Black hanging on in there still, a series of removal spells, the Cinderclasm there saying, I don't want you to keep drawing cards. I'm seeing the end of this. And that is an unexpected windfall. Can Rebecca Black pull off an unexpected comeback?
Yeah, and in a spot like this, Rebecca's a little stuck because it's really hard for her to interact and keep having cards in hand.
All right, we see the scoop, and that is the end of game 1. Emmaskyeward wins, and now on to the sideboard. So what are you thinking here? If you are the mono green roll, what are you putting in?
Well, you definitely want to be able to take out, to start with, all the cards like Blizzard Brawl, all the interaction Fear-Burns creatures. You just really want your most resilient threats of your own. And you definitely don't want to rely on fight spells that can be fizzled by a removal spell. So I'd expect a bunch, just more threats to come in, which we're seeing. I'd also expect removal like Tangle Trap or staying in rather than removal like Tangle Trap or Inscription of Abundance staying in, which have decks that don't require fighting creatures, with Tangle Trap killing an opponent's creature without here needing to have anything, and Inscription, as we saw, can play a pretty good defensive role, protecting your creatures from removal.
So on the draw here, going into game 2, Emma keeps a 2-land hand, one of those being the Mammoth that went down here. And right on cue, there's the 3rd land. It very much can pay to take a risk here, especially when going against Izzet, hanging on to those cards, proving to be a vital decision-making process here for Emma. Having those extra cards against Izzet, you want to make sure you have enough going down the middle. Very interesting approach here. Very risky. Pays off here for Emma.
Yep, and with there not being an instant speed answer for that back later, Emma's really just forcing Rebecca to play from behind for essentially the rest of the game, because if Rebecca's spending her turn 3 interacting with Emma's turn 2, then again, Emma's turn 3 is going to have to be contested on Rebecca's turn 4, going forward several turns into the game. And at some point, it's going to be hard to both answer what Emma's doing and provide enough card advantage to stay ahead. So a threat like back leader on 2 that can't immediately be answered puts a lot of pressure on this Izzet deck as the game goes along.
We have an iteration of the expressive variety here. No land on the outside, though, for that. Instead, going for a Burning Hands, which will defeat the troll. However, because it doesn't exile, that does create additional mana, which I've actually needed here. So interesting scenario there. Losing the Old Girls troll may have put Emma behind on board, but it has put Emma slightly more ahead than usual and not quite into crisis mode here on mana.
Yeah, that extra mana really, really counts, because the Izzet deck is under pressure to both draw cards and interact with its mana. The mono green deck just has to deploy threats. So having that extra mana allows you to, and maybe deploying multiple threats as early as turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, allows the mono green deck to get pretty far ahead, just because it can more efficiently use its mana than the blue-red deck to start with.
Thundering Rebuke showing the weaknesses that it does have. That sorcery speed makes all of the difference here. Izzet typically likes to be reactive so you can keep up the counter magic, but because of the sorcery limitations on Thundering Rebuke, that Snakeskin Veil is a very easy play here for Emma to maintain board status.
Yeah, and now that the troll's gotten up to being a 6/6, there's a lot of pressure on Rebecca to find an efficient way to answer it. There's already one burning hand down, there's only two more in the deck. And on top of that, anything like a bounce spell that would interact with the troll is something that would generally be better spent on the token. So it's actually putting pressure on Rebecca to interact in a way that's not quite ideal for her to make sure she just doesn't take too much damage early in the game.
Here with a 6/6 old growth troll, a 2/2 wolf, going into the battle phase, comes down the middle, gets the 1/1 counter, choosing old growth troll here as the target. We see that little bit of stickiness again. Could it be a divide by zero? We'll see.
Yeah, a divide by zero is perhaps the main threat, the main answer that Rebecca would want in the spot. As 7/7, the troll is at this point definitely beyond interaction in terms of damage-based removal. But divide by zero is neat, both not only as a way to answer the troll, but also a bounce spell that never could have been spent on the token to start with. So using it to answer the troll is particularly useful. Particularly with Rebecca coming up on 7 mana, which would be enough to cast a Mascot Exhibition should a Divide by Zero be cast.
Emma going all in on the mana, going with a Wren in 7 here, which does stick to the board, going for our wonderful tree folk friend here. Also has reach, very important, should the birds come down with the Epiphany. So 7 life left, 1 turn clock if that troll is not dealt with.
Yeah, and even if the troll is dealt with, there's a pretty good chance that Emma's going to have lethal next turn anyway. There's 4 lands in play, making that tree folk a 4/4, but a Wren plus could make it larger still. And then 2 Ranger classes could give it the 2 extra counters it would need to be a lethal threat on its own.
That is a Leer that just hit the field. That is one of the most important cards to Izzet besides the extra turn spells here, but it could be too little too late. This field that Emma has amassed is absolutely massive right now. A 7/7 and a 4/4. That is a Sculptor of Winter on the draw here, and we're about to see if Emma just has enough to go for it.
Yeah, all Emma needs to find is 1 land off this Wren plus, and that's enough to make the tree folk a 5/5, and then a Ranger class and activation would make it a 7/7 with 2 counters. So really, now it's just a matter of whether there's anything she wants to play around in the spot, and there's really not much Rebecca could have without having double blue up to be able to cast something like multiple Fading Hopes. There's not a lot of cards in a deck that would keep her alive in the spot.
Yeah, nothing from Fading Hope yet in this match in general, and that's one of the strongest cards you can have against Mono Green. You set Mono Green back by so much when you have that Fading Hope available. You can get rid of a massive token or an old growth troll here. Ranger class as intended, though. Will this be the end of this match? Coming in down the middle with the Tree Folk token and the old growth troll having trample here present. But Emma seeing the burning hands, but again, thanks to both Ranger classes here, this is going to be 7 damage per creature. Lear will be able to block. There will be a burning hands, but what is the answer after that?
Yeah, burning hands definitely keeps Rebecca alive here, but after jump blocking with Lear, taking damage once again to a spot where both threats are lethal, because the Old Growth Troll will deal enough damage with Trample to make the Wolf lethal on the subsequent turn. There's not a lot of outs in Rebecca's deck, save for perhaps drawing 4 Aldrin's Epiphanies in a row, which is always a possibility.
Absolutely, and those bird tokens making a totally huge difference there. Maybe not so much to the trample, but so much to dealing damage and then being able to block as a whole amassed army of birds later on. So there is also that Hall of the Storm Giants. You always have to be aware of that. That is a massive, massive creature. You have to pump a lot of mana into it, but something to keep an eye on over the course of this. 3 cards left here for Rebecca Black. Will it be enough to get Rebecca into game 3?
No Epiphany that turn leaves me inclined to believe it's unlikely to be the case. I think Rebecca in that spot needed to be taking at least 1 extra turn. And without that, there's 3 lethal threats here. And it's certainly possible that she ends up surviving, but there's not a lot of cards in her deck that would cut it.
Yeah, she could certainly survive to Divide by Zero, Fading Hope, but it would have to take multiple threats coming from her. And then meanwhile, Emma, she's just got it all right here in mono green. You have the pump, you have the draw that comes off the Werewolf Pack Leader. Just this is a very powerful board state created by Emma and mono green Stompy.
Yeah, and with the Hall activation, with the way Emma distributed her counters, only going for the one counter on the Wolf, it's still technically possible for Rebecca to survive with a single piece of interaction, something like blocking the pack leader and casting Fading Hope on the Old Growth Troll, or blocking the Old Growth Troll and having a Burning Hands for the pack leader. But without interaction, Rebecca is just dead on board.
And there's the good game, and Emmaskyeward is going to win this Tale as Old as Time aggro versus control by a score of 2-0. Good games to both players again. Unfortunately, in the case of Rebecca, and that would be on Izzet, she just could not find any of the extra turn spells or any of the bounce spells, which is one of the things that buys you time on Izzet and then eventually gets you across the finish line. Again, great games to both players. Rebecca hanging on there as long as possible, while Emma taking a chance in game 2 on that hand, and that could have gone in either direction on that case. So again, wonderful match here. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I think it was pretty indicative of how mono green's really good at punishing control decks that aren't prepared for it. With a bunch of answers like Burning Hands in the sideboard, Blue-Red does have a lot of interaction for mono green, but mono green is a deck that with Old Growth Troll, Ranger Class, Ren and 7, Essica's Chariot has just so many threats that provide multiple cards, essentially providing more value than just one-for-one trades that allows the deck to get really far ahead in a long game where opposing control decks are just trading one-for-one. And without something like Cyclone Summoner as a tool to go over the top of the decks, control decks are generally pretty poorly positioned to take advantage of that. So it was an excellent metagame call by Emma, recognizing that mono green was in a position where control decks weren't really respecting it. People didn't have quite the tool sets of removal to deal with the deck, so it was really well positioned.
Yeah, and again, that's why you have to make sure every single week, something that we do in VML. Now, you can over meta here. This is a really easy thing to do. I have fallen into this so many times. Once you get past that week 1, you start looking and seeing what your opponents have. And it's like, you can make a prediction, but it's so hard to over meta there. So it's totally understandable. As you said, mono green hasn't really been present in the meta. So that's why the Cyclone Summoners haven't been present in some of the more recent lists. Makes perfect sense. All right. And with that being said here, let us go over into our next matchup. We have Jesus Loves Unicorns here on Dimir Control again, a list that's kind of ever so present in the meta, but we don't get to see it as much here. Ton of awesome cards here from Jesus Loves Unicorns. We have the Sedgemoor Witch, a lot of value being conjured in that. Again, Lear making another appearance here. And the other one that I'm actually very surprised to see, and this is pretty present right now in the meta, is Go Blank.
Yeah, Dimir is a fairly new addition to the meta. It saw some play at the Kaldheim Championship and is really interesting as a control deck that maybe is slightly less well positioned against mid-range decks than the Izzet Epiphany and various other colored Epiphany decks are, but it does a really, really good job beating up on aggro with just a bunch of early interactions in Sedgemoor, which is a early game threat that buys a lot of time.
Absolutely. And again, Dimir Control looking to do a lot of the same thing. Keep an eye out, especially in this matchup here. There's always one card that kind of makes me worry, even if you're in an Izzet deck, and that is Shadow's Verdict, that can be used to take out the birds and open up the path. Something to keep an eye on during this. And now, Jesus Loves Unicorns' opponent, we have Jana here on Izzet Turns. You want to know what? Izzet is just the thing that keeps on showing up here. And I'm happy to have you here, Arya, especially for this week. I love the analysis of these Izzet matches here. And this one seems even a little more focused on turns here. We do see that one of copy of burning down the house in the main board, eggs in the sideboard here as well. Keep an eye out probably for unexpected windfall, and of course, Galvanic Iteration, Alrune's Epiphany. What else in this deck makes it maybe a little more unique from what we may have seen so far?
Yeah, we're seeing the full 4 copies of Galvanic Iteration, 4 copies of Unexpected Windfall, and that leaves this deck really, really well positioned to take on a deck like Dimir. The way Izzet decks play out against non-Izzet control decks, against other control decks where there isn't a pseudo mirror, Izzet decks certainly have the advantage, in part because they have a late game that just ends the game, whereas the Dimir decks are forced to have a slightly slower approach towards winning the game, but also because Galvanic Iteration plus Unexpected Windfall both gives a lot of card advantage, but also just a massive mana advantage that the Izzet deck can then later parlay into yet more card advantage to recover from something like Go Blank very well.
Yeah, we're seeing a little bit more of the card advantage in this build, and I'm very curious, especially in this control showdown, how is it going to play a role in that? Let's get started here on the matchup. Dimir control versus Izzet turns. So while we're waiting here, I am still studying this list a little bit. Test of Talents is another one where that can have a significant impact on the control matchup here. Oh, there we go. There we go. Here we are, y'all. We got the match. I promise you I'm not in this one. All right. So we have on the opener here, this is from JesusLovesUnicorns perspective here on Dimir control here. The 2-lander, remember, Jawari Disruption does double as a land. We have the client nice showing us, hey, this really is a land. You didn't have a 1-lander hand. That's always a relief to see. So interesting here, double duress here, especially in the main board to get started.
Yeah, I think the duresses in the main board are likely an accurate prediction that Jana would play some sort of blue-red deck because that's where they're at their best. And really, in game 1, with a deck like this, you really just want to rip apart the blue-red deck's hand. The Alrune's Epiphany in particular can be somewhat clunky in the late game, in the mid game, with it being a really, really expensive threat. And there's a lot of cards like that Syndiclasm we saw that are close to dead against the blue-black deck. So if you can just take those few pieces of interaction and those card draw spells, the blue-red deck's going to fall really, really far behind by virtue of just having a bunch of dead and/or clunky cards. And that's really what this deck is, what the blue-black deck is looking to do with all those Go Blanks and Duresses.
Yes, speaking of duress, so what we had seen there was we had a duress for a Divide by Zero and a duress for a Celestius here. Jesus Loves the Unicorns finding the 3rd land here and opting to go for, it looks like, the Go Blank here.
Yeah, the delay finding the 3rd lands is definitely awkward because at the very least that allows the Unexpected Windfall to resolve. But Go Blank does do a great job ensuring that the blue-red deck can't really lean on Galvanic Iteration as much for card advantage, because if you discard a Galvanic Iteration to Go Blank, it's just gone. Or if you've cast one beforehand, it's exiled from the graveyard, and that can put the Izzet deck a little behind.
All right, Go Blank also getting rid of the graveyard here. And again, that can be significant. I do not believe Jana's version of this is running a Leer, so a little less significant than usual, at least not relying upon that graveyard as much as Jesus Loves Unicorns is, but that is an Epiphany. Again, tale as old as time here. We have our 2 birds, and now, though, Jana's out of cards.
Yeah, and what's so powerful about Go Blank here in a spot like this is even if Jana has something like a Beholder Multiverse or some other card draw spell, it doesn't matter because it's 2 cards that have got to be discarded, and so Jana can't afford to wait. And if Jesus Loves Unicorns Go Blank does get interacted with, then, well, that's the last card gone from Jana's hand, one way or the other.
We're seeing an endurance strategy here. Jesus Loves Unicorns looking at that single of Baiting Hope here. looking to probably take out a bird. Those do knock out tokens. But something to consider is that fifth land is going to be pivotal. The Witch is in JesusLovesUnicorns' hand, but you need to draw the land here, and that is a miss there on the land draw.
Yeah, we saw JesusLovesUnicorns opting to put that duress on top. And I think that's a strong testament to just how good the card is in this matchup. I think in this spot, she correctly recognizes that if there's not a duress target in Jana's hand, then JesusLovesUnicorn is probably really far ahead in this spot anyway. And one of the few ways they'll lose is one of the few ways she loses is to a set of Alrund's Epiphanies and or Galvanic Iterations in Jana's hand. So making sure the last card isn't one of those, and it's something you can nab with duress to prevent Jana having any chance of getting far ahead, is really, really strong.
In doing so, she also has a very strong board presence. That was a 1/1 pest that was created there, the Witch surviving that Cinderclasm, and also still having the ward ability available here. So in terms of board state, thanks to keeping that duress on top, JesusLovesUnicorns does have a little bit of an advantage there, especially with the 2/5 drops in hand, now waiting on that fifth land. Maybe something to consider here coming up. That is a consider, and there is a land coming up here, Field of Ruin. That is an excellent one in this scenario.
Yeah. Something that's worth considering in this spot as well is how much of the blue-red deck's card advantage really relies on having cards in hand to start with. Most of the deck's card advantage is either Galvanic Iteration or Unexpected Windfall, generally the two of them in combination. Neither of those cards do very much on their own, so being able to put the blue-red deck in a spot like this with a ton of hand attack where there's not a card in hand to be able to use with Galvanic Iteration, not cards in hand to be able to discard the Unexpected Windfall, puts the blue-red deck pretty far behind.
Speaking of card advantage, JesusLovesUnicorns looking to expand on that card advantage here, getting the draw off of Limerith here. And that is a thirst for discovery in addition, since Crimson Vow has happened there. So as long as there is a land to discard, draw 3 and fear not discarding 2, but discarding 1.
Yep, and that was a really strong play from JesusLovesUnicorns in that spot, opting not to play the Hive of the Eye Tyrant out before combat to trigger an extra draw off the Imrit. JesusLovesUnicorns absolutely could have done that. Could have played out the land first, drawn an extra card off Imrit, but recognizing that one card really doesn't matter that much with the Lier in play, which is going to just effectively draw all the cards you need. Instead, she recognized that if she drew an untapped land, she'd really, really prefer to be able to duress twice, and that makes it, or duress plus consider, and that makes it worth not drawing the extra card off Imrit just for the chance to play out an untapped land the same turn you're landing Lier.
She opts for the duress there as well. It's better to know what is in the opponent's hand. And not only that, Jana did have a Galvanic Iteration in hand. And what that would do is that would duplicate any turn spell. I mean, it would duplicate any spell, but that is the one that you're looking for, is that duplication on the Alrund's Epiphany here. A little bit tougher of an option now that it costs 1 more.
Yeah, there's still a window for Jana to have something really strong here, like an Unexpected Windfall.
Instead, Jana, she has a divide by 0 here, double divide by 0, thanks to the iteration, and opting for some card draw here from Teachings.
Yeah, that Lier once again really, really strong here, though, with that double duress in JesusLovesUnicorns' graveyard. She knows she's going to be able to take that Teachings of the Archaics before Jana can cast it, so Jana's once again going to be in top deck mode against these multiple threats.
Speaking of top decks here, that is a duplicate. That is another Lier, but you never know if the Lier is going to be able to survive or not. That is public enemy number 1 here, if you are in Jana's shoes, just because there's so many different ways to recur spells and generate card advantage through that. Going for the duress again, though, JesusLovesUnicorn, she loves using the duress here, and it has been a very powerful spell here in game 1.
Yeah, and just recognizing in this spot that even though the second duress here is not actually doing all that much in terms of taking an impactful card, it's just taking environmental sciences, just recognizing providing Jana with one fewer card in hand, one fewer card to discard to go blank on subsequent turns, one fewer card to discard to Epiphany, just leaves JesusLovesUnicorns with a higher chance of being able to get ahead, and well, a lower chance of just falling behind a series of good top decks from Jana means that it's correct to duress there, even if the card it's getting is basically a land in the form of environmental sciences.
Card to the Foretell Zone as well, a place where any amount of discard cannot get to. Once it's in that Foretell Zone, it is a place of safety for that card. Can't help but wonder, could it be Alrun's Epiphany in waiting to go wait for an iteration draw to try to duplicate it here? Very interesting development we have here in this first match.
Yeah, I think in JesusLovesUnicorns spot, the card I'd be most scared of being foretold is a Beholder Multiverse, which it likely is based on the fact that Jana has priority on her turn. Behold's just scary just because it allows for multiple top decks, it allows for card draw spells into letting the Izzet deck just recoup a lot of card advantage even from being behind here. That's one of the things that Izzet decks does really, really well. So since there's a Lier in play, counter spells aren't doing anything, not that JesusLovesUnicorn has any in the first place. So this is the one window Jana's going to have to be able to try and get pretty far ahead and take a bunch of extra turns before the go blanks come down, or just foretell enough cards that even after the go blank, Jana will effectively have enough cards to mount an effective comeback.
JesusLovesUnicorns also having the board state under wraps right now. That is a 5/5 Limerick there and a 3/4 layer, 9 life left, so not quite enough to win the game, but it's almost there. And that is the second expressive iteration played in this turn for Jana.
Yeah, and Jana has to be a little careful about how low she goes on mana, just because there is that Hive of the Eye Tyrant just lurking along with the rest of JesusLovesUnicorns lands that will let her have lethal if Jana taps too low. It's worth noting that Jana can't rely on keeping up interaction for the creatures or for the Hive by the time we get to combat, because JesusLovesUnicorns could just cast a go blank pre-combat, and that would allow her to get rid of any interaction before attacking with the Hive.
See what you did there by talking about a Hive of the Eye Tyrant lurking. I appreciate that. We also have a Fading Hope here being used on Lier, and this is a really great play by JesusLovesUnicorns, simply because that Divide by Zero is going to fizzle and miss that at this point, so no learning of any kind going on here for Jana. The draw here, that is a Siphon Insight. Very interesting draw here for JesusLovesUnicorns, and there's so many different ways in which that can be recurred, but JesusLovesUnicorns loving the discard here, going for the go blank once more.
Yeah, and we talked about the blue-black deck being able to rip apart the Izzet deck's hand, and really Go Blank does such a great job of that just because it exiles the graveyard as well, meaning there's no using Galvanic Iterations as a way to turn your top deck cards into multiple cards, leaving Jana without really any outs.
All right, with that, JesusLovesUnicorns, she wins game 1. We are going into game 2, the discard being the big difference maker, as Arya was talking about earlier. And if you're an Izzet player, that's something you certainly have to be aware of. A main board of duress is not something that you see every day here. So great choice here by JesusLovesUnicorns of main decking just all of the hand removal, knowing well that Dimir would have a very good matchup against it as a result.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about the idea of metagaming and being prepared for what your opponent's bringing, and I think JesusLovesUnicorns has done exactly that. We're seeing her with almost no cards to bring in the sideboard just because her main deck is so well prepared to battle against Izzet with the 4 duress and the go blanks, whereas her sideboard is just a bunch of removal spells in case of a more aggressive deck, but her main deck was good enough for game one, so it'll presumably be pretty well positioned even going into sideboard games.
Well, Jesus Loves Unicorns, card of choice there. That is a duress for the Celestias. All right, I am stuck in a time loop right now. I believe that's just exactly how game one started.
Yeah, it certainly was, though there was no Malevolent Hermits game one, and that's
No.
definitely
No.
going to be pretty rough for Jesus Loves Unicorns. It just does a good job both being a threat while also preventing Jesus Loves Unicorns from spending a card draw spell here, and might lead to her slowly falling behind as a result, or at least not being able to get far ahead against the blue-red deck that has a superior late game.
She uses a Fading Hope here for Malevolent Hermit. Didn't think that one was going to get countered. More importantly, that Scry is going to be absolutely essential here. Hermit gets replayed again. It has board presence and counter here. And it looks like Jesus Loves Unicorns, again, sticking with the strategy, going with the go blank here, again, early on in game two.
Yeah, it's a little awkward that the Hermit just counters the go blank and trades essentially up on cards for it, but that Hermit's going to be something you need to get through at some point or the other, and Jesus Loves Unicorns recognizes that this is perhaps her best shot at it. She definitely needs it out of the way to be able to resolve that thirst for discovery to try and hit more land drops, so she might as well trade with the Hermit now to make sure she can push that through at least.
Yes, and she also is keeping the Blood Chief's Thirst for a rainy day in hand. There is still the back half of Malevolent Hermit, in that will take care of any kind of counter spells that could happen here. But Jana has to be careful because that could end up working against Jana too in a control matchup. The back end of Malevolent Hermit is very awkward here. Land drop here for Jesus Loves Unicorns. We're advancing back into Jana's turn.
Yeah. And something we saw there is, I think, something we'll expect to see a good deal of more across the rest of this evening, was Jana main phasing an unexpected windfall despite it being an instant, because just resolving that card in a control matchup can often be so backbreaking, just getting those extra mana, that it's worth tapping out main phase to cast it, or pseudo tapping out because you get the treasures to leave up counter spells, knowing that you won't have it countered and fall behind on cards, and knowing that just resolving it is going to give you a mana advantage going into the next several turns, while there's not much a deck like the blue-black deck can punish you for with tapping down for it main phase.
Jesus Loves Unicorns here, using Thirst for Discovery in a very promiscuous, very, very difficult, rather, situation here. So there is the perplexing situation of, do you let go of the one land or do you discard two non-lands here? This is a very difficult scenario here for Jesus Loves Unicorns.
Yeah, I think Jesus Loves Unicorns doesn't have much of a choice but to let go of the land here. Much as you want land drops from this spot, there's not really two cards in your hand you can afford to discard in this spot. Something like discarding Lear and Thirst would just leave you vulnerable to the Benevolent guys. Discarding the Consider is out of question because you need that to keep hitting land drops. And at that point, you're discarding Sedgemoor, which you're left with just the one threat in hand, which isn't really all that worth it, particularly against the 1 divide by 0 we see. So it's awkward to be missing a land drop here, but I don't think Jesus Loves Unicorns had much of a choice about it. I think she went for the only option she could.
And notice here, she did keep both Liers here. Lier is that important of a card where if one doesn't resolve, the other one is ready to go. So kind of risking the security of the land drop for maybe a more guaranteed Lier down the line. Very interesting decision, probably especially as she's going to need more card advantage down the line. We're going to see if one of those eventually gets resolved, and perhaps keeping that second one is going to pay off later on.
Yeah, one thing to note is that Lier is generally not the ideal tool in control matchups just because, well, you tap down for it and your opponent can just resolve whatever they want because Lier prevents things being countered. At most, you can play out Divide by 0 to interact with things on the stack, but Lier also costs a lot of mana to tap down for. What makes it really, really strong in Jesus Loves Unicorns deck specifically is those 7 discard spells, the 4 duresses and 3 gold blanks, that mean even though you can't counter things with Lier out, you can still interact with what the opponent is doing by just having discard spell after discard spell after discard spell to prevent them having powerful cards in hand to start with. And that allows Lier to be a good reactive tool, even though it isn't generally that in most blue-red decks, at least.
And that is a Galvanic Iteration, 1 card in the Foretell Zone. This is a very scary situation here for Jesus Loves Unicorns, sitting on a divide by 0 here, determining, where should this exactly go? And there is a lot of mana on Jana's side still here. So opting to stop the iteration here instead. Very interesting.
Yeah, countering an iteration, the spot is actually really heads-up play from Jesus Loves Unicorns, and something we might see a little more over the course of the evening. What that does is it puts the blue-red player in a really awkward situation, because they either have to let their iteration get countered, or the blue-red player has to interact with whatever the counterspell for the iteration is. But that means you're tapping down mana on your turn. You no longer have the mana to cast something else to go with the iteration. So it's really something of a no-win scenario for the blue-red deck. And particularly a divide by 0 on a flashback Galvanic iteration is really, really powerful, because that card's just gone forever. Even though divide by 0 in theory only returns to hand, with flashback spells specifically, returning to hand also leads to the card getting sent to exile. So you essentially get a full extra card by countering a spell and getting to learn. And on top of that, you're preventing really any interaction with your divide by 0, because that would mean the Galvanic iteration is getting wasted.
And certainly the rest of the graveyard has been wasted, as well as the rest of Jana's hand here, except divide by 0 to the rescue here for a lesson. Jana looking to replenish her hand to try to catch up here with Jesus Loves Unicorns here. We're getting close to an even game again, and that is an extra turn for Jana there. Alrune's Epiphany, as well as refilling the hand with teachings here.
Yeah, Jana notably seeking to take advantage of the fact that Jesus Loves Unicorns is tapped out. In another spot, we might have perhaps seen her just attempting to draw 4 cards off of, draw 3 cards off of the teachings rather than just 2. But she opted to play it immediately after the Epiphany, just recognizing that those 2 cards, while Jesus Loves Unicorns is tapped out, are worth significantly more than 3 cards at some later point where Jesus Loves Unicorns has mana up.
And now the check for traps is still in Jesus Loves Unicorn's hand. And the Lier, as stated earlier, that's a difficult card right now because, again, the mana is very limited in this scenario. So Jesus Loves Unicorns right now, she currently has a history of wanting to go for the hand, attacking the hand first here, going for Lier instead here for this turn.
Yeah, I think at this point, if Jana has anything at all in her hand, it's going to be really, really difficult for Jesus Loves Unicorns to win. So she kind of just has to hope that Jana has nothing and go for it with the Lier. But something like a divide by 0 is just not something Jesus Loves Unicorns is reasonably beating in this spot, because even if she does go for a check for traps, those birds are just going to kill her over a few turns, and she does need to impact the board to prevent that from happening.
And that is a full board there for Jana, playing the Mascot Expedition off the Learn, off the divide by 0. And now that is a lot of creatures and not a ton of life here. Jesus Loves Unicorn. She's down to 10 life right now. And there's just so many creatures to fend off, including arguably the biggest current creature on the board, 4/4. There is a Fading Hope, though, in Jesus Loves Unicorn's hand.
Yeah, that Fading Hope staying in post-board is definitely makes Mascot Exhibition perhaps the most awkward threat Jana could have had, because with the Hope in the graveyard, with the Hope in hand, those tokens aren't going to stick around for long. And perhaps the most important thing, and perhaps what makes Fading Hope so powerful in a spot like this, is On this turn, those Fading Hopes, and the next few turns, those Fading Hopes are going to serve as interaction. But at some later point in the game, if the board is cleared up and Jesus Loves Unicorn stabilizes, those Fading Hopes also double this protection for Lier, because you can just bounce your own Lier in response to the removal spell to keep Lier alive. So making sure that if Jesus Loves Unicorn survives these next few turns, she both has the advantage in the mid game, but also going into the long game as well with protection for her Lier. Of course, if there's an Elrond's Epiphany at really any time in the near future, then the game's basically over.
Yes, and that brings her down to 4 here. Still staring at a board full of creatures here. And it's going to be very difficult to play Lier. Lier is a very expensive spell. Again, Fading Hope is in there, and you could use it twice. But the problem is that there's just not enough mana here for Jesus Loves Unicorns to do everything she would like to do this turn.
Yeah, there are a couple of slightly fancier options you could try and go for to try and live through the next turn cycle. Something like Fading Hope, then casting Divide by 0 on your own Fading Hope to get Environmental Sciences, something like that to gain life. But that doesn't really that might let Jesus Loves Unicorn survive another turn, but doesn't actually give her any outs to win the game in her deck, and she'll almost certainly just lose to the 4/1/1 flyers if she waits another turn. So her best bet is probably just to play out the Liero, set herself up in a position where if somehow Jana fails to kill her with lethal on board, then at least she will have a chance to win in the next turn.
All right, Jana attacking the battle phrase, all in. And Jesus Loves Unicorns' only move here would be to use the Fading Hope. Just going to let everything in. And we are going to game 3, folks. What a wild control matchup so far. We've seen both the Izzet deck and the Dimir deck go off in their respective ways. Dimir attacking the hand. Izzet attacking the turns and using tokens to deplete life quickly. What a wild match so far. It should be very interesting to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, I think that was pretty typical of how the Izzet side of this, the Izzet deck would want this side of the matchup to play out. From Jana's perspective, she was able to resolve a main phase windfall, just get ahead on mana, and through the game we saw that we saw that Jesus Loves Unicorns was just stuck on mana time and time again, because the blue-black deck just doesn't have access to as much card filtering and doesn't have access to as much just ramp in the form of unexpected windfall. So you're gonna fall behind on mana, and once that starts happening, a mana advantage in this matchup has a habit of snowballing, because you can use that mana to look at more cards with things like Behold the Multiverse, to get more mana with things like Unexpected Windfall. And since you have flashback cards like Galvanic Iteration that get even more card advantage when cast multiple times, having the extra mana to do that just leads to snowballing card advantage, and it's really, really hard to beat for sitting in the opposing seat with a different control deck, because even if you get the blue-red deck Hellbent with no cards in hand, there's so many draws that are really powerful when the blue-red deck just has access to 11, 12 mana that you're still pretty strongly unfavored, even if you have more cards in hand than them if they're ahead on mana.
We're going into game number 3, and Jesus Loves Unicorns says, I see duress, I take the hand. And she is absolutely right in this matchup. There's nothing stronger than a turn 1 duress here, going first for Jesus Loves Unicorns.
Yeah, a turn 1 duress also backed up with a counter spell in the form of Test of Talents, backed up by some card advantage in the form of Siphon Insight, allowing her to either get her own counters or to maybe make sure she hits land drops. One of the issues with Siphon Insight is they can sometimes be a little clunky in some matchups, not being quite as good just by virtue of not getting cards you really want from your opponent's deck. This is not one of those matchups. Every single card in the Izzet deck would also be good in the blue-black deck. So Siphon Insight's just drawing you cards twice, and at that point it's just a really excellent rate card in a control mirror.
Also, real quick here, we did receive a raid. I would like to welcome everyone watching live here. This is VML Season 6, Week 6, and this is a heated Game 3 control matchup here. We have Jesus Loves Unicorns on Dimir control, while Jana is on Izzet turns here. Very intense matchup here. And as we go into the next turn, there is a go flank, there is a siphon insight here. I think I know what move she's going to pick here, just based on everything we've seen her do so far this game.
Well, one thing she gets to do here is with that spike field hazard got from Jana's deck, she gets to exile the Malevolent Hermit, just trading 1-for-1, which is not normally a thing her deck can do. But just now, notably as a blue-red player, in the mirror, you're always playing around that. You're never playing out Malevolent Hermit without a second blue mana to sacrifice it. But against a blue-black deck, you're probably not expecting Spike Field Hazard. So Jana going shields down there did give Jesus Loves Unicorns an ability to essentially snipe the Hermit for free.
I thought the unexpected moves were supposed to come from unexpected windfall. That's Jana's strategy, not Jesus Loves Unicorn strategy, although technically it came from Jana's deck. So who knows? All right, we do have a thirst for discovery here. And one of the things that Jesus Loves Unicorns did early was duressing for a Demon Bolt, just waiting for that Test of Talents that is now sitting in Jesus Loves Unicorn's hand. She has set up an opportunity to get rid of a card that is bothering her for this entire matchup. Will it be thirst for discovery? And it is not.
Yeah.
Not quite.
It's something of an awkward spot for Jesus Loves Unicorns, just with timing of threats and answers, because if she were to have run out that go blank on the main phase, Jana would just be able to restock her hand with thirst for discovery. But if she didn't run it out and just passed, well, she risks Jana just playing an untapped fought land and threatening a windfall. And that would mean tapping down for Siphon Insight would be really awkward. As it stands, that's less of the case because Jana ended up just playing a tapped fought land, but definitely an area that can be a little awkward for decks like this blue-black deck against Izzet deck, just because the Izzet deck has a threat that's really, really scary in the mid game with unexpected windfall, and the blue-black deck doesn't. So Jana can just snap out mid phase, but Jesus Loves Unicorns is kind of forced to keep up counterspell mana at all times.
And speaking of things that Jesus Loves Unicorns shouldn't be able to do, that is an expressive iteration played by Jesus Loves Unicorns, not Jana. So we're kind of waiting here. Now, an interesting play here. Kind of waiting on that divide by zero. That's the dangerous part of Siphon Insight. I wonder if we'll see it here.
Yeah, it's got to be tempting for Jana because that would return the expressive iteration to Jana's hand, essentially giving her a good 3-for-1 in this spot. But she recognizes that Jesus Loves Unicorns knows about that divide by zero. So there's absolutely no way she's playing that expressive iteration in this spot unless she has a counter spell for whatever counter Jana has.
Going for the duress here again, a favorite of this match by far by Jesus Loves Unicorns. So we get to see now what's in the hand. And oh wow, that is quite the amount of choices here. Choosing the divide by zero, as a lot of us had probably suspected by this point, one of the more powerful cards here for Jana in this matchup.
Yeah, so I think the card that Jesus Loves Unicorns most wants to get in the spot with the Test of Talents is that Galvanic Iteration. Iteration is a card that Blue-Red really, really leans on for card advantage. Without it, it's just the 2 copies of Behold. Unexpected Windfall without an iteration is not card advantage. It's just neutral on cards. So if you can Test of Talents that Galvanic Iteration, it puts you really, really far ahead. So it makes it very hard for Blue-Red to pull ahead in the long game the way it did last match. So Jesus Loves Unicorns really wants to save that Test of Talents either for Galvanic Iteration at a time where it'll prevent Jana from having any card advantage, or for Alrund's Epiphany, because getting rid of all the extra turn spells generally does a good job making it hard for the blue-red deck to win the game.
Jesus Loves Unicorn. She's very much in the tank right now. Lots going on here. The Go Blank is tempting, but there's not a lot of threats. per se present in Jana's hand right now. The Hall of the Storm Giants cannot be animated yet. There is not enough mana, and just really a bunch of, we'll call it slight removal, but not too much going on within Jana's hand right now.
Yeah, I think JesusLovesUnicorns definitely wants to save the goal blind for maybe a little later in the game, or at least a point where she knows she's getting rid of 2 impactful cards. Last turn, Jana, if she hadn't wanted a graveyard to have been exiled, could have even double disruption the goal blank just to make sure she continues to have a graveyard to play towards a better late game. Casting it now ensures that Jana's graveyard gets exiled and also puts pressure on whatever that last card is in Jana's hand to be cast, if it's a card advantage spell of some sort, and Test of Talents can then take care of it.
Yes, speaking of something unexpected here, that is a Test of Talents on the Unexpected Windfall. She takes her time to make sure she has the extra mana to play around the Jawari disruption here. This is big for Jesus Loves Unicorns here. That is one of the biggest hand advantages, and also land and or treasure advantage that Jana can have here. So that's going to make casting the Epiphany a little more complicated. All right, so right now, Jesus Loves Unicorns cannot play anything, but there is a Divide by Zero and a Meat Hook Massacre should there be any kind of learning going on here. Jesus Loves Unicorns very much. She's in the driver's seat here in the scenario every control deck wants to see, and that is the ability to destroy the field or the ability to bounce something and be able to react to it later on.
Yeah, and this is where we see, I think, both really interesting aspects of both these control decks, really, with the blue-red deck really just being this intricate combination of pieces, leaning really hard on Galvanic Iteration as a card advantage engine, really hard on Alrund's Epiphany as a win condition, really hard on Unexpected Windfall as a mana engine. So it puts the deck in a spot where really any piece of interaction any piece of interaction with any of those 3 pieces can put the deck far behind. So now with no windfalls left in a deck, Jana is kind of behind going into the late game just because she doesn't have the ability to get a mana advantage anymore, and her card advantage is also a little limited with the windfalls gone to copy with iteration. But at the same time, the blue-black deck is a little bit of the other end of the spectrum, where it doesn't have anything it leans super hard on, but sometimes the different parts of the deck just don't work particularly well together, like the Meat Hook Massacre in this spot just really not having much text, and that can lead to the deck floundering a little in the late game like this, where it needs to draw well for a few turns, otherwise it'll just die to something like a Hall of the Storm Giants.
Yes, and Jana going right down the middle with the Hall of the Storm Giants, saying, well, if I don't have anything else, I'm going to do damage for 7 here, which is massive in a controls matchup here. Forces Jesus Loves Unicorns to play that mascot exhibition to defend here, and now she is in a position where she is tapped out, and Jana could potentially draw something here, or at least try to trade 2 of the tokens in for the Hall of the Storm Giants. Another important aside here, while all of that was going on, she also played a Meat Hook Massacre here for 0, which will cause life loss on behalf of Jana and life gain on behalf of Jesus Loves Unicorns.
Yeah, not perhaps the card's ideal usage in this matchup. I suspect Jesus Loves Unicorns wanted it more to be able to actually deal with the resolved Alrund's Epiphany, but at least the card continues to have some text here and will allow her to pressure Jana a little more. It's worth noting that she still doesn't really have an answer for Jana having something like Galvanic Iteration plus Alrund's Epiphany. If the Thought card is an Alrund's Epiphany, then a top deck Galvanic Iteration still puts Jesus Loves Unicorns in an awkward situation, and she doesn't really have any counterspells or interaction to deal with that.
Duress for Spikefield Hazard here is the play. Well, Jesus Loves Unicorns wanted to know what was in Jana's hand, and she certainly got that information here. Spikefield Hazard takes out the flying inkling here, but Jesus Loves Unicorns still very much in control here. That is a thirst for discovery, which again, if a land is drawn, that can be discarded in the place of discarding 2. Otherwise, 2 cards will be discarded here. This is a very difficult scenario for both players to navigate, especially Jana, who's down to that Hall of the Storm Giants.
Yeah, and some really heads up play and use of and just restraint more than anything else on Jesus Loves Unicorn side, recognizing that she could have maybe gone for lethal, gone for some attacks with the tokens, and or activated her Hive of the Eye Tyrant to maybe try and get some attacks while Jana is tapped out of being able to activate the Hall of Storm Giants for a block, but recognizing that the one way she loses this game is if the Foretold card is an Alrund's Epiphany and she doesn't find any interaction. So opting to instead make sure she's able to cast Thirst for Discovery to allow her to maybe find a counter spell for an Alrund's Epiphany if that were the card Foretold, or it be the card top decked.
And that is a great card to pull off the Thirst here. That is a Lierdon, and there is a ton of mana present this time. This means Lier can be protected, Lier can attack, and there's the Alrund's Epiphany on Jana's side. Let's see what happens with the draw here, more importantly.
Yeah, should that Lier resolve, it's also important protection against the top-decked Epiphany. We spoke a little bit about how Lier prevents spells from being countered, so isn't great against something like Epiphany. But Lier does have a surprising amount of utility in this spot because there's 2 distinct options Jesus Loves Unicorns could take. Not only could she cast the Divide by 0 from her graveyard should Jana cast an Alrund's Epiphany, and that can bounce a spell even with a Lier in play, she could also cast a Test of Talents from her graveyard, targeting a top-decked Alrund's Epiphany, and with the spell on the stack, opt to Fading Hope her own Lier to make sure the counterspell can actually resolve.
Hall of the Storm Giants on top for Jesus Loves Unicorns, and she has a very difficult decision. She keeps it on top, another creature, but more importantly, that Lier, as Arya was saying, that has a ton of defenses present, including Test of Talents, Divide by 0, some of the best in which this Dimir deck has to offer here. Wow. So many choices here for Jesus Loves Unicorn. She's sifting through. Again, can't necessarily go after Hall of the Storm Giants because of the ward associated with it, but can slow down. And speaking of things that can handle Hall of the Storm Giants, that is a Field of Ruin here, something that I'm sure she was looking for over the course of this now. And down to one more possible castable spell here. There is the Duress. There's much to consider here. 1 card left.
Yeah, and you talked about Hall of the Storm Giants ward being an issue, but that's just yet another area in which Lier is really, really good, because Lier makes spells unable to be countered, and that includes by ward abilities. So even that Hall of the Storm Giants, generally a pretty safe threat, not going to cut it against Lier because it can just be removed with removed by basically any removal spell, with Lier preventing the ward ability from countering Jesus Loves Unicorn spell.
All right, Jesus Loves Unicorns plays the Hall of the Storm Giants, has a little bit of catch up to do life-wise. And here comes Jana's Hall of the Storm Giants coming on through the center here, saying, all right, lose 7 life or lose your Lier here. A difficult decision here for Jesus Loves Unicorns to make.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot to be afraid of out of Jana's deck in terms of things to deal that last 4 points of damage. With all the interaction in her graveyard, Jesus Loves Unicorns should be able to prevent things like a top-deck Elrond's Epiphany. And save for that, there's not much that could actually do the last 4 points of damage. So I agree with the decision to just make sure that Lier stays safe, allow herself to untap with it and a ton of card advantage, and just use that to get pretty far ahead over the next few turns.
Jesus Loves Unicorns in the tank a little bit here. She has a lot to consider. Going for the Field of Ruin. The only negative instance of Field of Ruin going off here is this will clear up a mana for usage for Jana, but at this point, this is a decision that needs to be made considering the tap scenario here for Jana. So this is a little more can't animate in response type deal, but thanks to what Arya explained here about Lair, the word wouldn't matter at this point, which is very interesting. That was something that I hadn't even known. So Lair's ability, good for many, many different effects here, even things you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, and at this point in the game, it definitely feels like Jesus Loves Unicorns is firmly ahead. Jana really just has to turn out to draw something to keep her alive, and if she doesn't, then the game's pretty much over. It's really just Elrond's Epiphany or bust at this point.
Down to 7 for Jana here with the down the middle from Lair and Hall of the Storm Giants, and that is it. The game is over. I have one question if I were to ever come across both of these wonderful folks who play today, Jana and Jesus Loves Unicorns. Good game by both players. Arya, how much time was left on the clock? Did you happen to see that? Because I was getting really nervous there.
I have to admit to not having paid much attention to the clock. I was way too focused on the intense game taking place, but now you mention it did take quite a while.
Yeah, I believe according to our run of show notes here, that was a 43-minute match. You'll love to see it if you're a fan of control mirrors here. GG on both sides there. Dimir control, piloted by Jesus Loves Unicorns. She certainly has found the kryptonite of Izzet turns there. And wonderful play there by Jana as well. Just that test of talents, taking out the unexpected windfall there, seeming to be the crux play there in game number 3.
Yeah, it really highlights that while the Izzet decks might be the best decks in Standard right now, they are still just a combination of really, really powerful elements that are very reliant on each other and does leave the deck a little vulnerable to something like Test of Talents or Go Blank or just a bunch of discard spells, doing a really good job picking the deck apart.
Yes, and again, great game to both players. Thank you all so much for playing it. That was a pleasure to watch, and this is coming from an aggro player who's still learning some about control, so thank you both so much. Just excellent match. All right, and with that being said, speaking of our players here, I believe we have some interviews here, some of my favorite segments here. So without further ado, take it away, Werewolf and Vampire.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Who, What, Werewolf. I'm your hostess of Howls, Nicole Callahan, joined here by the wonderful MsEldritch. How are you doing tonight?
Hi, I'm doing great. How about yourself? Happy to be here.
Doing phenomenal. Happy to have you here in the eternal night on this beautiful plane of Innistrad, representing Team Werewolf, out here growling and clawing our way through.
We even got the nails for it.
Oh, I like that. Oh no, I gotta get mine done.
It's true.
So we're hard repping werewolves here. So tell me your favorite. Well, it could be. I think it's going to be a werewolf card. I have a feeling, but your favorite card from Innistrad. I'm pushing it to be a werewolf. That's all.
Perfect. I mean, I understand why we're like a little bit biased. Yeah, my favorite one is the Primal Adversary. It's a really great, it has multiple purposes. If I either need something, kind of big early on the field, if I want to save up and be able to kind of spend more to get, those lands in play as well. So it's just a really nice, flexible but really solid card. So that one's been really great. Plus, I just love the art on it, like the giant wolf in the hallway. I think is menacing and just really pretty. So that's my favorite one.
I feel like that's a good way to describe any werewolf. It's menacing but really pretty.
Yes, right. Just kind of my whole brand together, like the MsEldritch,
Oh, that's great. They really have been knocking it out of the park with the art in these last few sets, including, I don't know if you've seen, because it's brand new, but with Alchemy coming out, there was a werewolf flip card there. So it's exciting. Werewolves getting into all the new formats and everything too. We're clawing our way into those. So now, so we got Alchemy. We're playing Standard here at the VML, but what is your favorite Magic format?
I think it's currently it's EDH. I'm playing a ton with friends that I've met, especially during the pandemic. It's really great to like be able to play actual paper, but with people wherever, even if we can't see each other. But also, Standard's been amazing. Just being able to use that to kind of learn how all the mechanics work, so that when I take it into the other formats, I'm playing with people, not just like in my little computer screen. I have a better understanding of how the game works.
That's awesome. One of the best things about EDH is being able to like have your group, you play with your friends. I think that's fantastic. That's phenomenal.
Yes.
I'm hoping that, I know this is your second season of VML, and I'm hoping you're finding it just as welcoming here, and would love to hear about what your favorite parts of the VML. What's the best part about being in this community, or like how'd you find us? What would you like to tell us?
Yeah, I think I might have found you through Hayu posting on Twitter. I don't remember, but I remember seeing some of the tweets popping up, and I had never done any kind of like competitive tournaments because I came to Magic really in the last couple of years, like during the pandemic. So it's not really something I'd had an opportunity to do. And so I was like, you know what? Like, not only do I think this is amazing to focus on marginalized genders, but also what a great way to get started to, kind of dipping my toes into competitive format. So like, not only am I up against some of like the best players around, but also getting a chance to connect with other people and make new friends and really just have that kind of affirming experience.
That's wonderful. I'm telling you, Hayu is like our number one recruit. Hayu like goes, Hayu was hard.
Yeah, which is great. And I saw the I had heard that it was coming, and so like I literally put in my Google Calendar like go sign up for the VML because I had such a good time last year and I didn't want to miss it. So I was like counting down till when it was coming out. So if anyone else is like considering it out there, I would highly recommend it. So like put in your calendar, come check it out.
Right, an absolute shining recommendation here from MsEldritch. I don't think, I can even add anything to that. It's great community, friends, like you said, some of the best competition you will find around, but some really good, like, innovation and everything, different decks. It's just a lot of fun. It's a great atmosphere. I love it.
Yeah, I had somebody last week who was playing mono white for a while, which is kind of what I've played quite a bit in standard. But they brought an Esper like mid-range deck, and it was something that I hadn't really seen. Definitely not kind of with all like the big meta decks. So it was like had some really interesting cards that on the face of the like on the surface you're kind of like, oh, that's a neat card, but then you see them in play and you're like, oh, that actually does a lot of work. So I was like really impressed just to see kind of the range of different decks and things that people were playing with, and also just some of the good old standard decks that are just, wailing on everyone. So it's been great.
Right. I love it. They can keep you on your toes at all times, week to week. It's always a battle. And, speaking of keeping you on your toes, I cannot let you go without hearing your best werewolf howl.
I figured this question was coming. So I will say, I don't know if I have like the best howl. I feel like I usually channel more of like the either cute little puppies or like old dogs that are like trying their best, but you can tell it's like a full-hearted howl. So
are you
like,
give me two? I want to hear the puppy, and then I want to hear the sweet old dog one. I want to hear two.
Okay, two. All right. So I think the puppy would be like just a little baby. They're trying their best, and you get the older dogs that are kind of doing like, ow. They got like the little throat. They're trying. They're doing their best. We can always see it in the neck. They have a really good howl.
All right, you absolutely nailed it. I love that. That was phenomenal, MsEldritch. Thank you so very much for your time, and a best of luck to you the rest of this season. Oh, you're so
awesome.
welcome.
It is a delight. Thanks so much.
As are you. You have a wonderful evening. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Interview with the Vampire. I once again am your mistress of midnight, Nicole Callahan, joined here by the wonderful Mel Woods. Mel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us here in the Eternal Night on the plane of Innistrad. So why don't we start there? We're a couple sets into Innistrad now. We've got even more Innistrad cards coming out in all sorts of formats on Arena. So can you tell me, and keep in mind, you are Team Vampire, but can you tell me what your favorite card on the plane of Innistrad is? What's your favorite Magic card that came out of Innistrad? And it could be any Innistrad. It doesn't have to be this most recent one either.
Yeah, I mean, I actually started playing Magic since the original, so I never saw original Innistrad or Shadows over Innistrad. This is my only Innistrad set since I've started playing Magic. So I think I have to say, and it's because it's done a lot of really good work for me in the VML so far, that Adeline is my favorite card. Also because she's a queer icon, we love to see it. So
More
yeah,
of that in Magic, please.
Yes, definitely.
I'm also a big Adeline fan. Everybody loves, the mono white. We'll forget that Adeline's one of the ones that crashes the vampire wedding. We'll just, she's Team Sorin, so we're just Team Sorin here. That's all. But Adeline,
yeah, pretty much.
Adeline is great. It's nice to see White getting some powerful cards and an awesome character as well. That's phenomenal. All right, so can you tell me then what is your favorite vampire card? And then that again, all of Magic.
In terms of the flavor of it all, I really do love Florian. I think that I just love the energy of Florian. I think he has some very fun to him. I like the new Olivia as well. Is very fun, very stunning, gorgeous, work it, etc. So yeah, those are the first few ones that come to mind. But also as a draft player, I really do like the Blood Tithe. Oh gosh, what is it?
No, it's Blood Tithe Harvester.
The black red gold uncommon from this set is a very good Magic card, and so in terms of play, I quite like that one.
That's awesome. So we got a lot of vampire love here. And now since you mentioned limited, I will ask, because with the recent release of Alchemy, all these new cards, everything going on, what is your favorite format to play in Magic?
Oh, definitely draft. I've only I've played Arena as much as I can as a Mac owner since it came out. But my favorite way to play Magic is to go draft in person with friends on a Friday night. Or my favorite draft format of recently has been MH2. I have a good group of friends who we draft it every couple weeks, and so that's been really, really fun. And I just like how you're starting from nothing every time, and you're all on the level playing field. Like, you all kind of have the same. It doesn't matter how you've metagamed or like how many expensive fetch lands you've bought. It's like you're all on the same page, and I think draft is really fun for that.
Oh, I absolutely, I love it. Now I need to know, we'll have to take some notes on here on the VML that, limited is definitely a popular format. But being as your first season, how did you find the VML?
Yeah, so I actually draft and play Magic for like Friday Night Magic and stuff at the same local game store as Hayu, one of the organizers of the VML. And I've known her for a couple of years, and we've played back and forth. And as you know, some of the very few not cis men at the local game store, you chat and whatnot. And she finally, I think, convinced me for this season that I would enjoy it, even though I'm not really a standard player or a constructed player in general. She kind of talked me into it, and I'm really glad that she did, because it's been really, really fun so far.
Yes, word of mouth is huge in this community, and we love them. We all gotta, stick together, show support and love and welcome. So I'm super stoked to have you here for your first season. What's been your favorite part of the VML so far? I know you're only a few weeks in, but Yeah,
I've really enjoyed seeing the different decks that people play. I'm very boring. I've brought basically the same deck every week, and I love my mono white aggro, and it's done very well for me. So I'm not mad about that, but it's been very fun to see. There's one week where I played against like a colorless combo-y Oswald Fiddlebender deck that was just so fun and weird and beat me. I went 2-1 against them, and it was like, oh, I want to go try that deck on Arena now. Like, I never would have thought to do that, and I think that's really kind of cool to see what people are coming up with. What brews they're coming up with, and also to see the Discord chatter and see, lots of people supporting each other and helping each other. It's cool to see that kind of community aspect to it.
So I love it. I love that the innovation week to week, how the VML works, and being able to see those cool new decks. I'm kind of the same as you. I'm like actually the vanilla because my mono white deck, but a tip of the cap to everybody who brings those awesome decks every week. It's really cool, and it definitely. Yeah, we all have our own, niche. We all we all work our own roles. So, but that's fabulous, Mel. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate your time, and best of luck to you the rest of this season.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you.
Hey folks, welcome back. Thank you to Nicole, that is Lady of the Crease, our resident werewolf vampire extraordinaire. And thank you for those interviews. Some wonderful folks there in the interviews. We appreciate all y'all being involved with the VML. Regardless of your record, we're very happy to have you all in the community. And just, again, please be sure to give us a follow here if you're from the raid. And follow us on Twitter as well. That is at VMLMTG. And I'm ready for some more action here. How do you feel about so far, especially that last control matchup we had, Arya?
I'm really excited to see more. We've seen Izzet is maybe the deck to beat coming into this week, having done really well at the championships and being the most played deck. Well, so far it's the deck to have been beaten because both matches we saw Izzet lose, and I'm interested to see how well Izzet continues to perform.
And indeed, we will have that question answered. Let's roll on into our next match. All right, so if you have seen enough Izzet, guess what? There's more. However, this time is Jeskai. We have a Jeskai turns list here by Aura. She is bringing on the, oh my gosh, there it is again. Right on stage there. Lear is back. Alrune's Epiphany's back. Doomscar? So that is one way to handle some aggressive threats here. What do you think of this spicy Jeskai list?
Yeah, it's definitely attacking the meta in a really different way than a lot of the previous Izzet or other blue-white X control decks are. It's worth noting that like Doomscar, not a card that's seen a ton of play in the recent past since rotation, just because it lines up so poorly against a lot of threats from aggro decks. It lines up badly against something like Redane and Talia. It's really clunky against mono green with things like Olgrot Troll, Essicus Chariot, Ranger Class, all giving you value that survives Doomscar. But that's Doomscar in your blue-white control decks. Doomscar is a way to get card advantage and handle every threat in play. In Jeskai, in a deck like this deck isn't looking to Doomscar for card advantage. This deck is just looking to Doomscar to stabilize, to buy time until Galvanic Iterations and Alrune's Epiphanies can come down. And for that, Doomscar's kind of the perfect tool because it does just flat answer everything. So it doesn't matter if there's some value that can be gained over the next few turns with Olgrot Trolls and Ranger classes or things like that. It does an excellent job buying time to get to that late game, and is a really, really strong option in that slot, giving this deck a lot more game against aggro decks, but maybe stretching the mana a bit. So definitely coming at a cost.
Yes, and one last thing here before we move on to the next deck here. What will be your victory dance if you make it into top 16? You won't catch me dancing, she says, just screaming with joy. I very much approve of that. And again, folks, these are pretty high stakes matches this week. So let's see what is on the other side of this matchup against Jeskai turns here. And we have Zabracus. That was our guest host from last week, and she is bringing mono green aggro here. We have pack leaders and caretaker here, both from Crimson Vow. So again, a few cards here trickling in from the new set here, but otherwise pretty standard fare for mono green here. We have the chariots, the ranger classes. The caretaker is a very unique option here, and I want to hear your reaction to this, maybe in this matchup, Arya.
I think caretaker is largely for creature mirrors, where the mono green deck really wants a way to go over the top, and caretaker does an excellent job of that, kind of running over any equivalent threat from your opponent, really just taking over the game on its own. Against a deck like blue-red, it's fine. It does still get countered, which makes it a clunky 6-drop, but at least it has hexproof. Against Jeskai specifically, it's really, really awkward against a deck that not only has counters, but has a bunch of Doomscars that are going to be trading up on cards and mana if you're playing out Aberbrooke Caretakers.
Absolutely, and we do have a few more Crimson Vow decks here than cards in this deck than per usual here. So let's move on into the match and see if any of those Crimson Vow cards can play out here. Again, this is mono green aggro versus Jeskai turns here. We are seeing this from the Jeskai perspective here from Aura here. She has a kind of awkward hand here to start. Goes for the mulligan here. and now has a few more ways to draw out something to handle the aggro, especially towards the beginning and here in Cinderclasm. But we're seeing a little bit of thinking here with what do you toss back here?
Yeah, it's tempting to bottom the Galvanic Iteration because it's a while before that card actually does anything. But something that makes it really strong in this spot is that Cinderclasm generally too little to clean up the creatures from mono green. There's a lot of X3s, X4s that Cinderclasm doesn't kill. But Cinderclasm in conjunction with Galvanic Iteration, dealing 4 damage to everything, something really, really powerful even against mono green, and an instant speed board wipe that is really hard to give up on.
Yeah, this is a very tough decision early. And again, we're only returning 1 card back to the bottom, starting on a hand of 6 on the play here. And there's still that thought about the lands here. Again, not an easy decision here. And the trouble with the pathways, they're wonderful, but they do cause you to commit. You really can't change those around easily, if at all here. So here we go here, going with the Needle Verge here. Red Source probably going with the Iteration, the Cinderclasm, etc. here. And we have a pack leader from Zabracus to start here. And right now, important decision here, not going for the Iteration because there could be a land that comes off of that on turn 3 here. Pack leader coming down the line for 2 here. This is a very explosive and quick start here. And what does Zabracus have on 2? A Werewolf pack leader. That is probably not something that Aura wanted to see here. Very difficult, as Arya had stated earlier, to deal with that pack leader so early.
Yeah, and even though the cards in hand all seem castable, we're already seeing some of the issues with the mana for this Jeskai deck. It needs double blue to be able to cast something like Leer, triple blue maybe to cast something like Leer plus a Fading Hope. It needs triple red to be able to cast Galvanic Iteration plus a Kick Cinderclasm. It needs double white to be able to cast a Doomscar. So just a lot of different requirements on the mana that make it a little awkward, particularly in draws with things like Pathways to start, which notably can only ever produce 1 color mana. So they're not true dual lands for a deck with as many restrictive requirements as this one.
Now, if you're Aura here, you're like, dang, I don't want to pick just one of these. And unfortunately, with the absence of a land here, all Aura can really do is move a card back into the deck, and then that one that goes into exile, forever remaining in exile for this match.
Yeah, and that's definitely not ideal because in this spot, Aura really, really wants to be able to hit land drops to start getting towards that layer, getting towards double spelling. Instead, if you start casting Fateful Absence as a way to interact, that's actually trading down on cards, letting Zabracus continue to just have threats by letting her draw more cards. And without casting multiple spells in a turn and without having the ability to keep making land drops towards Leer to actually try and get some card advantage, Aura's in an awkward spot.
Yes, very much so. And Aura opting for the Valorous stance here over the Fateful Absence as to not generate a card disadvantage here. And you saw it coming, except it's not see it coming. It's Snakeskin Veil here being played on the pack leader. If you have the single green up, you have to know that it's coming. It's just one of those cards if you're a control player, you always sense that it's there.
Yeah, and while it could be worse for Aura, at least she has another removal spell to deal with the 5/5 pack leader, so it's not just drawing a bunch of cards on its own. Trading down on cards, still not having that mana, leaves her in a not great spot going into the next turn. She doesn't really have a lot of draws that are going to be able to get her out of this.
Yeah, Zabracus continuing to apply pressure there. That is Old Growth Troll, one of the toughest aggro cards to deal with here. Bounce probably being the best way to do that, but just nothing but a handful of absences here.
And another Snakeskin Veil, an Inscription of Abundance, really any number of lethal threats here for Zabracus, so not likely that Aura is able to take this one away, even if she lives through this turn. Just more threats coming down forces Aura to continue having multiple answers a turn for Zabracus's threats, while also continue to give her more cards with Fateful Absences, making a late game pretty untenable.
That is old growth troll number 2. Zabracus just continuing the fire and the gas in this match here. Meanwhile, Aura finally getting that 4th lane, but is it too little too late? Faithful Absence can deal with that old growth troll here, but being down to 2 cannot respond to both of these, except there is that iteration there. But again, will it be enough? Will there be another Snakeskin Veil here? Is it too early of a good game? Let's see. Let's see.
Yeah, there could be a Snakeskin Veil, but at this point, the copied Fateful Absence is giving Aura from Aura is giving Zabracus 3 clues total to draw 3 more cards. She already has the Fateless Haven as the lethal threat. She has the ability to activate her Ranger class at some point for more threats off the top. She has the Old Red Troll land in play as yet another lethal threat. It's going to be nearly impossible for Aura to answer all these threats, particularly with no possibility of top decking something like Doomscar, and several of these threats being things like lands or Old Red Trolls, which can be deployed at end of turn.
Yes, and with that being said, Aura still playing through her turn here, just thinking about all the different thought processes behind this, but that is a Faceless Haven face down on Zabracus' side of the field here, and there's just going to be too many threats here for Aura to deal with. And there goes the troll down onto the field. Again, Old Growth Troll proving to be powerful. It is mana. It is 2 creatures in 1 if done properly. Faceless Haven animates for multiple threats here. And this looks like this is going to be it for game number 1 here. Divide by 0 will bounce the pack leader, but that is it. And Zabracus wins game number 1.
Yeah, and it goes to show that, like, even if you have a version of control that's really prepared for an aggressive deck like this, there's still just the issue sometimes that your draw is just too slow. If you're running things like Lier, Hullbreaker Horror, Alrund's Epiphany in your deck, you do have top end that's not going to do anything in the early game. And if you stumble on lands, draw too many of those cards, you're generally just going to lose. It doesn't matter how well your specific control deck lines up against the aggro deck in question.
And yes, that is a Hullbreaker Horror here. More affectionately called by some of our VML production staff here is Monsieur Le Pinchy. I have to make sure I stay true to the lore here on the VML staff here. And again, it's going to be a matter of when do those Doom Scars hit there. It's going to be an important key one to look at in the matchup here. We're looking at the first hand here by Aura again. And again, that Faithful Absence is a wonderful card, but it's really tough to deal with here. Mono Green absolutely thrives on that card advantage, and Control does not want that card advantage to happen. So rough first hand here, Aura mulliganing. And now, while the Doomscar is present here, the lands could easily get pretty stuck here. No red source here in the opening hand for Aura.
Yep. Once again, that Jeskai mana being a real issue for this deck, because there's another red needed for this hand, there's another white needed for Doomscar. You do want double blue to be able to cast things like Lier at some point. And one of the many issues with the mana of this deck is, with all these other threats you're running, with things like Doomscar, the deck ends up being unable to actually find room for those unexpected windfalls, which means the deck just doesn't have the ability to ramp into a late game the way other other blue-red control decks do. So it is really reliant on playing this 1-for-1 game in the early to mid game, which makes it really important that the deck hits lands.
And that is the third land for Aura here. Nothing on the field so far for Zabracus, but this is still a really tangled situation here for Aura. A lot of the stuff here really expensive, and the mana is very much wonky right now. Iteration here is helping out, but again, remember the land has already been played for this turn. There was a missed land drop last turn, so as a result, that pathway cannot be played, and Aura is still finding herself short on everything right now. That is a Froghemoth that's going on here. A card from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. I hear it's a very fierce creature. And my goodness, just, again, another hasty threat. You thought the moose was the only hasty threat? Froghemoth says, hold my beverage. I got this.
Yeah, and Aura does have answers for the Froghemoth here, but again, we're talking about that same situation we saw when with Blue-Red against Izzet in the past, where with blue-red against mono-green in the past, where if the mono-green deck gets one turn ahead, it just puts a lot of onus on the blue-red deck to have answered turn after turn after turn, because the mono-green deck is deploying threats ahead of the Izzet deck, and this just puts the deck in a really, really awkward position.
Yes, and that double white is such an expensive cost there. And the pathways are great, but if in this matchup you do not get that double white in time, that is going to take a really big toll on the board state here. And that is a caretaker that just got played. Hexproof provides counters to other creatures. It is one tough card here. And speaking of tough cards, here's another commonly played one. Faceless Haven coming down the middle, cannot be divided by 0, not only because it's hexproof, but also because of the fact that it is a land. So this is a really tough spot to be in here. One more draw here coming up. Opting to divide by 0 for the portable hole now. Arya, you were talking about this earlier. There's many creative uses for divide by 0 here.
Yeah, and in this case, hitting the portable hole is not only important to let her learn to get environmental sciences and play that Doomscar, but also actively giving a card advantage. That said, there's still that Faceless Haven with 2 counters on it. Aura's at 4 life, and there's no real way to answer the board as well as that Faceless Haven, unfortunately. So she doesn't really have outs to avoid dying here.
Well, that is a game. Zabracus does win 2-0. However, I do want to draw attention to the creative play that was the divide by 0 for the portable hole for the environmental science to still wipe the board there. It is unfortunate that the life total was where it was there, but still a really great play, and just goes to show you that divide by 0 is a very flexible card. Probably one of the more powerful blue cards in the format here. Good games to both players there. Again, Zabracus winning there 2-0. Mono green aggro just being relentless tonight. And I know Arya is a very big proponent for the Izzet Jeskai series here. If it runs iterations, if it runs epiphanies, Arya is all about that. So there may be, I don't know what's about to happen here. I haven't seen these and I don't want any spoilers. There may be one more point for redemption here. But before we go there, is there anything else you would like to say about that match, Arya?
Not really. I think it, again, did a good job highlighting one of the risks of playing cards like Doomscar and Syndiclasm in your Alwyn's Epiphany, Expressive Iteration, Galvanic Iteration deck, which is unfortunately the mana in Standard really just isn't good enough to support double color cards of multiple different colors. And even though a card like Doomscar is a pretty natural inclusion in Alwyn's Epiphany deck, it does make it a little awkward to actually be able to cast all your spells with a mana base like that when you're relying on pathways that can only produce 1 mana in a given game.
Absolutely. So one more chance. I'm not going to say this is it, but we have 2 very awesome decks coming down the pipe here. The final match of the night coming from Division 8, the Division of Death. I may be a little partial. Me and Arya are both in that division, and it is really scary in Division 8, just so you all know. But here we go here. This is Ariel Davis here, and they are on Grixis turns here. And I have seen this Grixis list going around, or many different iterations again. Sorry, I love that pun for tonight. Going on with Grixis turns here, we have Galvanic Iteration again showing up again. It's been in a lot of our decks tonight, and just a cast of familiars here. We have Sedgemoor Witch coming back here, so this is a little bit of the hybrid here. We see a little bit of the Izzet list here, and a little bit of that Dimir list that JesusLovesUnicorns showed earlier too. What do you make of this deck? And I must ask you, how did you feel about this deck when you saw this deck list?
This list seems very well prepared for the matchup in question, which is Grixis Epiphany Mirror. And regardless of how earlier matches have gone today, I can guarantee we're going to have at least one Epiphany match one Epiphany deck claiming a victory as a result of this mirror. The list is really well prepared just by virtue of having Duresses in the main deck, 3 Go Blanks in the sideboard, which are good to copy with Expressive Iteration. Though with these Grixis decks, with these iteration shells, when it comes to the mirror particularly, there's always a give and take. There's always like some disadvantages to any given build and some advantages. This list is very well prepared to be proactive with its galvanic iterations, with the 3 go blanks in the side, very well prepared to be able to force through things like its own unexpected windfalls, with the multiple duresses in the 75, 2 in the main, 1 in the sideboard. But what this list is lacking in return is no disdainful strokes in the main deck or the sideboard. And it's just really low on answers to something like Goldspan Dragon as a result. So, and also a little soft to something like Behold the Multiverse as a threat that lines up very, very well against hand attack, as you can foretell it early and then cast it at the end of your opponent's turn after they've cast all their duresses and go blanks, possibly copying it with Galvanic Iteration to just refill your hand entirely. So a very well-positioned deck for the mirror, but still not without its weaknesses, as basically any version of Blue-Red X will be.
I want to draw attention real quick before we go to the next slide. I love their answer to the short MTG bio, and they say, I played Wall Tribal in Modern for 2 years, so you know I'm taking this very seriously. You want to know what? I appreciate that answer, Ariel. So again, we are going now to their opponent here. Oh, and hey, look, we know this face. We've seen this face today. It is Arya's deck on also Grixis turns here. So we are, no matter what, seeing an Epiphany win. Huzzah. And also, oh my goodness, there's a lot of familiar things here. Arya, since this is your deck, I want to get the first-person perspective here. How did you choose the deck, and what did you think going into this matchup, knowing that you were playing something that resembles a mirror match?
Well, I wanted to build a version of Grixis that was kind of good against everything, which I did a little bit of. There's the Cyclone Summoners in the sideboard for mono green. There's the 2 main deck Syndiclasms for mono white. And it's generally speaking a list that's well positioned in the mirror. But in order to get those tools for other matchups, my list just didn't have any of those things to give you a strong advantage in the mirror. There's the 2 copies of Behold the Multiverse. There's the 2 Goldspan Dragons as tools to get ahead. But this list is... In the mirror, this deck is really just a blue-red deck. Its Grixis portion is really just for aggressive decks. So it doesn't really have gold blanks or duresses. And what losing those cards ends up doing is it denies the deck a way to be proactive with its Galvanic iterations. The Galvanic iteration is still really powerful, can be used to copy unexpected windfalls and Alrund's Epiphanies to either get ahead on mana or win the game. But you can't, it doesn't let the deck be in a position where you're just about even on mana in the mid to late game and just go for Galvanic iteration, go blank, wipe your opponent's hand and win that way, because go blank is just not a tool this deck has, nor is the rest. So again, that same give and take with these Izzet decks, where you can't have all the tools that make the Izzet decks good in every given matchup, and you can't have all the answers to be good against everything your opponent could possibly be doing. So this ability to play well in other matchups, this ability to have powerful card advantage cards and good reactive answers with disdainful stroke comes at the cost of the ability to be a little more proactive with your Galvanic iterations.
And of course, we're seeing the signature sideboard card here for anything that's Grixis, or is it in terms of Arya here? And that is the Cyclone Summoner. Again, maybe not as relevant here, but very relevant for the aggro matchup. We've been talking about that tonight as we've been seeing the Izzet and Jeskai list here. All right, let's get ready to go here, y'all. I'm very excited for this matchup. I want to see what's going to happen with this Grixis turns mirror. So here we go. We are seeing this from Ariel's perspective here, but we do have a double hand cam. Look at that. We're going to be able to kind of analyze these moves a little bit more. And also, again, we get that nice perspective here. You know, I'm always going to ask, you know, what was going through your mind? What do you think here? So to start here, we do have a keep here. I believe both sides kept their respective sevens, both of them. So here's what we have here. Not really looking too much here at the Grixis end of things here, but we are going for the Epiphany. That is a duress. Also, I can't help but wonder if we are going to see iteration into duress here. That's not something you get to see too often.
Yeah. Something I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the blue-black versus Izzet deck was just how important unexpected windfall is in these matchups. And it's even significantly more important in the mirror than it is against a deck like blue-black, because really all this matchup comes down to is mana advantage. Whoever's able to resolve the first windfall and start getting ahead on mana generally is able to cascade that into getting ahead on cards as well. So both players using their turn 2 to foretell cards is pretty common for this matchup and makes a lot of sense because it means that it means it's one of the few times they're going to be able to tap low on mana without risking the opponent resolving an unexpected windfall.
And that is a Beyond the Multiverse that goes on for Arya here. And again, both the unexpected windfall still present here. I don't think it would be so unexpected if that were to get played over the next turn. Again, instant speed though. And that is an opposing unexpected windfall here. So windfall for both sides. However, the difference being that Ariel cannot play their unexpected windfall, unlike Arya, which can play her unexpected windfall. So a tale of two different windfalls here. One very expected, the other one not so much.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that really shifts how this matchup plays, because regardless of whether Ariel had a windfall, if they just had another red mana to represent a windfall, I would not have been able to cast an unexpected windfall in that spot for fear of it being countered. But without a second red mana, there's really not much that Ariel could do to punish me for just going for a windfall, so I did.
Makes perfect sense here. So Ariel put in a difficult position here. Could Epiphany in theory here, but opts not to. Again, the iterations in hand. Ariel just wants all of the extra turns. And again, this is what Arya said here is you're going back to that thing. You want to have as much mana as possible on the field, whether that's mana from treasures, mana from permanents. Those are going to be the most important factors in this game here. And Ariel is forming the land base, just missing that second red. And even if that second red were to show up, you also need a third red from the iteration here. So this is a very tough spot. The treasures from the windfall would aid in that, but that is only a band-aid. And again, that second red here is needed. Meanwhile, Arya going in on expressive Arya going in on expressive iteration. Sorry, there's so much going on here that I'm trying to follow here. So again, grabbing the land, and oh my gosh, is that 4 treasures I'm seeing right now? Arya just building up the mana base right now, which is something you are terrified of seeing in a turns build.
Yeah, and it may be a little deceptive here because we're in a spot where neither player has any creatures in play, no damage has been dealt, so the game might look to still be very close, but in reality, those 4 treasures in this control matchup just put the blue-red player in this case, put the player with the treasures, in this case me, so far ahead. It's just such a huge mana advantage that can't really be come back from. And that in turn will cascade to more of a card advantage because I'll be able to cast more draw spells, be able to tap lower without fear of a counter spell. That there's really not much Ariel can do in this spot. Eventually, I'm just going to be able to go for Galvanic Iteration, flash back into Aldrin's Epiphany, and there's not enough counter spells in Ariel's deck to be able to counter it with this much mana.
This is a massive amount of copying here. We have 2 iterations on the stack so far. And again, due to that mana advantage here, and again, playing the extra mana, again, respecting the possible counterspell here. There goes Aldrin's Epiphany for the 1 to pay just in case. But this is looking absolutely ridiculous here. Are we going to copy another iteration here? Nope, that second red is missing there. And that is it. That is game number 1. And that is a massive amount of second and third turns here. I mean, it's like we've had 1, but what about second and third extra turn here? So very impressive dominant performance here by Arya in game 1 here. And you got to feel good about that.
Yeah, it's really very indicative of how these blue-red matchups really play out, where the game is really decided in the first 5 or so turns, not 5 or 6 turns a lot of the time, if anyone does tap mana, just by who has resolved more unexpected windfalls and who has more treasures. There's a lot of other factors, and there's a lot of other cards that seem to matter in this matchup. And while they generally do, if one player is able to resolve a few windfalls and the other player is not able to resolve a similar level of threat, that mana advantage is just really, really hard to beat because every other card in this deck is just so mana hungry, particularly with those Galvanic Iterations, incentivizing you to be able to cast them and flash them back in the same turn. It's really hard to beat a mana advantage, because once you have the dredges, you get to start flashing back galvanic iterations, which lets you start copying windfalls multiple times, which is drawing more cards and making it more dredges. Eventually you get to start copying go blanks or Outrun Epiphanies, and that's just going to end the game at some point.
Wow. So I take it the advantage here of having Grixis versus, we've seen Jeskai builds that do things that's more for fear of creatures. Though this is for specifically against other Izzet decks, other Grixis decks. This is supposed to meant to be a mirror breaker almost, because you have access to all of that hand removal.
Yeah, discard is one of the advantages of Grixis. It's not a game-breaking tool as such. It's still really soft specifically to Behold the Multiverse, because foretelling that is really, really powerful against a discard package. And if you end up casting discard spells in your main phase and then have your opponent Behold the Multiverse, you're going to fall behind both on cards and on mana left up on their turn, allowing them to untap and resolve something like Galvanic Iteration Windfall. But save for Behold, the discard spells do definitely give an edge on a few different levels. The one is just making sure threats resolve and taking threats or answers at key times, but also just for forcing your opponents to have it. Something that comes up quite frequently in this matchup is just the threat of having something versus actually having something. You'll see neither player is going to be very encouraged to tap out on turn 3 or 4, just because they don't want to offer a window for an unexpected windfall to resolve. What all the discard spells do is that they just let you look. You can just tell whether your opponent has an unexpected windfall or not, and that'll let you play far more freely than your opponent ever can without discard spells. And go ahead.
No, all I was going to say is we do have a Sedgemoor Witch down, and that is going to be tough for board presence here in terms of what you are facing here, Arya. I mean, granted, that can be removed pretty easily. I see the Divide by Zero there, but that is a really tough thing to deal with early game, is the board presence there on the Witch.
Yeah, and a card like Witch has a couple really important functions here. One is, of course, just to put pressure on the opposing deck. It kind of forces me to take some action rather than just leave up interaction for an unexpected windfall. And that problem is exacerbated by how well the discard plays with this game plan. Because if I were to say leave up Divide by Zero for an unexpected windfall rather than dealing with this Witch, then Ariel could just continue to attack with Witch and play out interaction, and at some point duress and force me to have the counterspell, which I didn't have at the time, only an expressive iteration. And that means that waiting and pretending to have counter magic isn't perhaps as good against this Grixis list as it might be against others, just because it leaves a window for a discard spell to actually check whether you have that counter spell and punish you for not having it.
Well, there's the second red right there for Ariel. They finally, if I'm them, I'm like, oh my goodness, all right, I got the second red down, the windfall can come down, but now they are trading that for you having yours here, Arya. So again, here, leaving some things open. The Witch here is for the board presence. Arya deciding to go for the windfall. However, the treasures from the windfall can be used here to get rid of the unexpected windfall here. Suddenly, this game looks like a very different situation here, especially with the top deck of the next unexpected windfall, the unexpected windfall, if you will.
Yeah, and this is part of what makes Windfall such a strong play. The fact that it's a proactive play that gets you ahead on mana but doesn't tap you out, because you still get to hold up counterspell mana off the treasures. So in the situation where you're casting Windfall and your opponent's casting Windfall, well, and you're countering their windfall off the treasures, sure, you're not getting ahead on mana, but you drew those 2 cards off the windfall, whereas your opponent just discarded a card to their windfall but didn't draw anything off it, and so is going down a card. And neither player getting that mana, plus Ariel being able to get ahead on mana in this spot and get ahead on board in this spot, and also allowing them to get ahead on cards by trading 2 for 1 with the windfall, just puts them really, really far ahead and is just really powerful in a spot like this.
They're also dominating the board space right now. And again, you don't talk about the board that much. We were talking about in the last game. Hey, it's like, what, turn 8 and there's nothing on the field. Here, this is the exact opposite. Because that witch was resolved so early by Ariel, they have established board dominance. And at this point, once board dominance is established, unless there's some kind of wipe, that's a tough thing to come back from in this matchup. You'll either need some kind of form of extra turns to gain some leverage on here, or some kind of Cinderclasm or something. This is just a really, really tough setup to be involved in here. And especially that is our friend Pinchy here in Ariel's hand. Entirely possible for that to be played, especially considering the unexpected windfall here. But first, a swing down the middle. Everything that can attack is being attacked downtown here. And again, the menace on the witch is also especially relevant here. Just again, such a brutal card in a control matchup.
Yep, and another part of just what makes this matchup so dependent on which threats are drawn versus which answers are drawn is the fact that you can't really afford to leave in a card like Cinderclasm in a matchup like this. But on the other hand, when there's a spot like this, when one player gets ahead with Witch, you're also just falling really far behind without something like a Cinderclasm to protect against a board like this. And so that's what makes something like Witch such a strong threat out of the sideboard. To a lesser extent, even things like Goldspan Dragon, there's not that much removal you can leave in a matchup where it's often dead, but that means that that ends up meaning that for the most part, threats like Sedgemoor Witch are often able to just run away with the game. And there's not much that can be done about it once it hits the board because of how awkward keeping in that removal would be.
Yeah, down the middle with the witch it is here. Arya down to 2 here. Ariel establishing a very powerful board here. And again, this is all thanks to that early witch. So perhaps there is some merit, even in a control matchup, to establishing an early board presence here. That was especially early. Also, the discard on the windfall was also very difficult to take in here too. And now it looks like there is a go blank situation here, which not only is possibly going to make a discard of 2 cards, you either flush out a divide by 0 here, or there is a discard of 2 cards here. We'll see what happens. And looks like there's the divide by 0 there for the go blank. Here comes the witch activations here for Arya as well.
Yeah, and Galvanic Iteration is a card that pairs really, really well with Witch, giving you several extra tokens, both by giving you one where you cast the original spell and an extra token where you copy the spell. But that said, doesn't pair all that well with Divide by 0, particularly in a spot like this where the Sedgemoor Witch in play's ward will protect it from being bounced. So extra tokens here, but not much else to be gained. And this means that Ariel is fairly far ahead in a spot like this.
Yes, indeed. So Go Blank still does go off here. There are 2 epiphanies left, but again, that witch cannot be specifically targeted right now. That's why the Cinderclass I mentioned was there earlier, because that doesn't specifically target, but it's only for this scenario. That is a very corner case in this matchup. So it's tough. It's tough to think about what to decide, how to prepare here. Down the middle with the 2 pests, and I believe we're going to be seeing some All Runes Epiphany action here, which activating in response to that. So another extra turn here, and unfortunately that is an expressive iteration. Normally a pretty okay card here, but no land to activate the second epiphany here. So interesting scenario here, can very much block here. So life fairly secure now, fairly stabilized here due to the massive board created with the birds. Still the epiphany and a spike field hazard as well too. Not a terrible position to be in, but being at 2 with that witch on board is still really scary.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit earlier about how Go Blank allows this Grixis deck to be proactive with the way it deploys its card advantage cards as opposed to reactive, and just getting ahead on cards as opposed to putting the opponent behind on cards with something like Windfall. And it really did an excellent job of that here, because even though I've stabilized in this spot in terms of on board, that go blank, ensuring that I got down to 0 cards in hand, means that even with the stabilization, I'm really, really far behind on cards, and that puts me behind in the long game.
Ariel, they are looking very fondly, we'll call it, at Monsieur Pinchy here. But going for the unexpected windfall, as stated by Arya earlier, this is the power card in the matchup. So makes sense, makes sense. And now 2 more mana down in the form of treasures here. Pinchy's still looking pretty there. So let's see here. So in with everything again. There is still the menace here. What do we have here response-wise? We have a Spike Field Hazard for one of the birds. And we'll see what happens with the blockers here. It's going to be very close. And again, that witch has to be double blocked here because there's no other way of dealing with it. And that is enough for lethal. All right. Looks like there's enough blockers here to protect Arya. Will there be enough for a comeback, though? The witch is off the field. That's very good news. If you're Arya, and then look at that. Arya still has her witch on that side of the field here. This does provide potential for a comeback here, even though that Pinchy is looking very menacing over in their hand, in Ariel's hand. So, suddenly this became a game again.
Yeah, though we talked about earlier about that go blank, and again, it's showing its importance here, even if not immediately obvious, because what it's doing here is preventing me from being able to hit lands, preventing me from being able to cast something like Windfall, and ensuring that I have a lot less life top decks because I no longer have the ability to Galvanic Iteration Aldrin's Epiphany because I just had to discard too many cards to hit enough land drops to do that.
Well, lots to consider here for Arya, as Consider is played here. Spikefield Hazard to the yard. That is an iteration, though. Is it going to... Oh, goodness. I'm sorry about the puns, y'all. I know this is Grixis, but I just said, is it here? So here we go. Unexpected windfall here. Iteration to the yard here, and a second iteration. So, again, looking a little spooky. Enough blocks here, but again, let's not forget about Hullbreaker's ability here. That is going to take away from the blockers here, and we do see the internal grasp here. More than enough life to pay for Ariel here, so this actually could be it here. It was all about the windfall draws here, it seems, right at the end. Almost stabilized, though, against a nightmare scenario against a witch here. I do believe we will be going to game number 3 momentarily. One more draw, though. One more draw. Can this be it? What do we have? We have a land here. So we are going to game number 3, but my goodness, the near comeback from Arya here. So this is getting sweaty here. We're getting into the 3rd match, but again, Arya is going first here in game 3, and just... this is a tough mirror match. It's tough to watch. I cannot imagine how difficult it is to pilot this scenario.
Yeah, I think that game was really interesting in that it highlighted a lot of what Ariel's deck is good at doing, even when it doesn't draw the cards to do it. So we didn't see a duress in the early turns of the game. Oh, well, we didn't, not this game at least. And yet we saw the duress effectively having effect on the game by forcing me to tap out on turn 3 rather than bluffing a counterspell, knowing that I can't get very far bluffing in this mirror just because Ariel has 3 duresses, and at some point will be able to just call my bluff in addition to holding up counterspells and windfalls. So I do have to go for it and hope Ariel just doesn't have anything. And that's a really, really potent tool in this mirror, just because from my perspective, I'm forced to just assume Ariel has windfall or a counterspell whenever she passes with mana up. Whereas I don't have that same ability to bluff because the duresses force me to make game plans that won't be entirely ruined by Ariel just calling my bluff.
Wow, I'm excited to see game number 3. Now, again, we do have the luxury of actually knowing this time. How much time is available on your clock, at least? Do you remember?
I can't say I do, but I don't think we're that far into the clock yet.
Okay. good thing to know here. We're taking a look at the side deck from the other angle here. We do see the Cinderclasms, but again, that's such a situational position here. We're only seeing a couple of witches. It's not like it's a super full play set here. So you don't want to draw that like really late. I mean, it's good against the birds too, but again, it's just, it has to be at the right place, right time, and you cannot afford to be taking those gambles here in the mirror.
Yeah, which is an interesting one because it does have the ability to be really scary, specifically on turn 3. But in turns after that, it's hard to deploy without leaving your opponent opening to resolve Windfall. And perhaps more importantly, it often ends up just being outclassed by other threats. Things like Lier, like Goldspan Dragon, just end up taking over the game and making Witch a lot less relevant, because it doesn't matter if you have a bunch of ground blockers, if you have just making a lot of mana, taking extra turns, and ending the game.
Ariel drawing absolute fire so far, the Duress and the Go Blank in their hands so far. Meanwhile, Duress pulling something here. Lots to consider here. And again, not necessarily a pun, but there really is a lot to consider. Going for the Divide by Zero, one of the more powerful cards in this matchup. Arya, meanwhile, deploying that Consider. Getting a land. Land's never a bad thing here. Land is part of the advantage in this matchup so far. So that will be the 4th land currently, one of them being in the hand still. Meanwhile, Ariel there going for just going right for the Go Blank. Doesn't care about the potential counterspell here, just going for the Go Blank, putting it all on the line here.
Yeah, and this is another spot where just an awareness of what my deck looks like just allows Ariel to go pretty safely for the Go Blank in that spot, knowing that there's only one Test of Talents in my list.
Yes, so again, the land count is currently even in terms of what's in the hand to what's on the field here. Going for the Unexpected Windfall, while Arya is fairly tapped out here. Again, to my knowledge, no 1-mana counterspell for an instant here. So pretty safe to be able to do this on the end of Ariel here, and just lots to do, lots to consider here. However, Ariel is short on lands right now, whereas Arya keeps drawing the lands. And again, lands are power here. So going for the Spike Field Hazard as a land here. But that is a Witch from Ariel's hands. So
yep.
This is tangled. This is very tangled right now.
And this is another testament to the power of Go Blank in a deck like this. Putting me in a spot where I'm forced to go for something like Mystical Teachings main phase on turn 3, knowing that if I don't and just spend my turn doing nothing, that a Go Blank on the next turn will put me even further behind. Meanwhile, if I do go for the Mystical Teachings main phase, it leaves me reliable. It leaves me a little vulnerable to an Unexpected Windfall, and that was something Ariel ended up having and was able to punish me for playing around the Go Blank that I'd seen.
The Lier also getting discarded here. Fantastic choice, as if you don't have a graveyard, there's nothing really to cast from that. So again, great thinking, great perspective there. So now we see an expressive iteration for an expressive iteration. It happens more often than you think here. So that is a land, and it can be played again. Instead here, though, looks like we're going to be having the Epiphany for the Foretell here. You could bluff a counterspell here, but this is a very tricky situation because, again, that is a treasure. That is temporary land, and lands here are power in this particular matchup. So it'll be interesting to see. No spending of the land there. Makes sense. And now back over to Ariel's turn here. And not a lot of land action going on so far. It has ceased for a little bit. Going with the board control here again. And I have a feeling I know what's going to happen here next. Yes, that is Grasp for the Witch. Arya says, no, we've been there, done that. We're not going to do that again. I'm paying my very hefty toll between the Grasp and the Witch. This ain't happening again. And I cannot say I blame Arya here. Fantastic move.
Yeah, and well, we talked earlier about how this matchup just comes down to mana, and it's happening here again, even though it might not be all that obvious. Despite Ariel having resolved an Unexpected Windfall, she's in a spot where the treasure is where she's still missing land drops, and the treasure is at best putting her even on mana with me. So she really needs to keep hitting land drops, otherwise all these extra cards won't really matter because she won't be able to cast enough spells.
Oh, they very much have a lot of difficult decisions that they need to be making here. So that is a layer for them. And then we also have this divide by 0. So again, a lot of different junctures here, and you don't want that witch to resolve. So they are opting for the divide by 0 here, and probably going to grab environmental. Probably, we'll see. Well, that's if I were to take a guess. Yep, environmental for them. And then that is going to help them recover on lands a little bit, which is part of the currency here in this matchup.
Yeah, and this puts them pretty far ahead in this spot. There's a few draws that could be really bad for them, but they're just ahead on cards, and have that iteration windfall next turn is just a really, really scary threat that they can resolve in the next turn or so, which I just don't have that many cards to answer.
And that is a gold span dragon for Arya there down the line. You want to talk about powerful board presence. There's really only a limited amount of ways that they can prepare for this here. Going with the, I'm assuming, iteration into windfall here, a great strategy. Discarding the other unexpected windfall and duplicating it anyways, right? Why the heck not here? But that is a treasure caused by Goldspan Dragon, and that is a disdainful stroke there for Arya. So one of those will be able to be countered here, countering the original one here. I believe the copy will still go through here. Yep. But stopping one of those is still quite big. Getting a land here for Ariel. They are still in a pretty decent position there, and that is a go blank that they have just drawn. So again, there's just so many different choices here, and this mirror match is just making this all the more confusing. So in Ariel's position, they are debating the go blank, and there's really not too much else going on, but still there could be some bluffing of some sort going on here. So go blank, you see the iteration, you see the witch there. And again, we were talking about the iteration earlier. I was talking about it with Arya, and we were saying that iteration getting evacuated out of the graveyard into exile, that's a big difference maker in this match.
Yeah, and something that's worth noting is we talked about Ariel's deck maybe not having that many answers to something like Goldspan Dragon, leaning without any disdainful strikes, not having anything to interact on the stack, and removal not being ideal against it. And we're seeing that be really relevant here with the Goldspan Dragon just generating a ton of mana that makes it really, really hard for Ariel to come back, even though they're so far ahead on cards.
They are indeed far on cards, but now we see the power of the iteration here. And that's the thing. We were talking about the snowball effect that this Grixis turns deck can have. I believe we are beginning to see the snowball here, but here is another iteration. Anybody keeping count right now of how many iterations there's been cast during this? There are so many copies of iteration. And now, speaking of copies, this is Alrund's Epiphany here being copied. But however, I believe, oh my gosh, we're going for a double test of talents. Is this really happening? Oh my gosh, this is test of talents for Alrund's Epiphany in a turns deck. This is so critical. Good on Arya having patience, and now the Epiphanies will be extinguished from the deck, and that is game. Arya taking this down by a score of 2-1. What an exciting ending that ended on a test of talents. Counter spell there. What a matchup. I was not expecting the match to just be over like that, but there we have it. I don't know what to say. I get the appeal now of the control mirror there, because that was really awesome to see.
Yeah, part of what makes this Izzet matchup so interesting is that it can sometimes be really dynamic. You have all these games where there's players sitting there doing nothing for 5 or 6 turns, just holding up windfalls, or someone resolves a windfall on turn 4 and the game, and it just spirals out of control. But there are still these games where it's a really long game. Both players have a lot of really complicated decisions, and then it all pivots on 1 or 2 crucial turns where there's a threat like a Goldspan Dragon that is isn't immediately answered, or there's the windfall into an Alrund's Epiphany that like there isn't enough counter spells for, that make this matchup really, really dynamic and hard to tell until the game's actually over.
Yeah, I am speechless after that. And all I can say, y'all, is be careful if you get into a control mirror with Arya, because oh my goodness, like I'll be honest, I don't know what I would have done there, but I'll tell y'all something. Ariel did a fantastic match. They very much rose to the occasion. Good game, seriously, for them as well. So again, our division is very much up for grabs right now. I'm actually up against them next week, and I'll tell you, that's going to be a spooky, spooky, spooky matchup for me. And that's where we're going at the end here. We are heading into week 7 next week here at the VML. And pretty soon we're going to have our wild cards. We're going to have our top 2 folks from each division. We are winding down the season already as we are suddenly entering our last week of division play beginning next week.
Yeah, that was both an interesting match in terms of the results for standings, with I think us having 4 or 5 players at 3-3 going into the last week, and also just a fantastically played match from Ariel. There were perhaps some slightly awkward draws and missed lands that led to them not quite getting there, but just fantastic play and fantastic preparation, really, with the deck list that was really, really well tuned for this week.
Wow. Well, I just want to say all of the matches this week were awesome. Be prepared for Mono Green. We learned that. Make sure if you're playing a control deck, you never know when Mono Green's just going to come around the corner and do its thing. If you're playing into a control mirror, it looks like Test of Talents is a very potent spell to have, and Galvactic Iteration is just a ridiculous card. Be sure to keep an eye out for it. Be sure to save your Test of Talents for either that or the Alrund's Epiphany. Anything else you'd like to say before closing, Arya?
I just want to remind our viewers that the VML is sponsored by Wizards of the Coast and brought to you in partnership with NRG Series. They run a super awesome paper tournament series, which has an event coming up this weekend, so do check that out.
All right, awesome. And I would love to thank my co-commentator here, Arya. Thank you so much. I enjoyed doing commentary with you, had a fantastic time. And I would like to thank everyone at VML for working behind the scenes here. Phoebe, our wonderful tech friend here, we very much appreciate your hard work, and none of this would be possible without Phoebe. So thank you very much. And also everyone else who works very hard on production week in and week out. Becky Bear for doing the slides for us this week. We very much appreciate and love you as well, Becky. Thank you so much. And with that, we are heading into what is deemed the best week, according to Caroline. There, week 7. Who will emerge from the divisions? Who will sneak up and grab those wild card spots? Stay tuned next week, folks. We will be here again. I believe we will be starting at 9 p.m. Eastern. You will not want to miss it. If you're here from the raid, please drop a follow if you haven't done so already, and please follow us at VMLMTG on Twitter. And I am also wanting to ask Arya, where can folks find you?
Oh, you can find me at hogblog_98 on Twitter and on Twitch and basically everywhere else. How about you?
I can be found at Skybilz pretty much everywhere. I am on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, etc. I am a person with many hats. I speedrun and I play various card games, including Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, which I will be playing at AGDQ22. Very, very excited about that. But with that being said, for the VML, I am Skybilz. We have Arya here as well. Thank you so much again, Arya, and thanks to Phoebe as well. We will see you next week for week 7, the terrifying and very, very, very suspenseful conclusion of VML League play, of division play. You will not want to miss it. See you next week, y'all.